This meeting to order. My name is Joe McGivern. I'm the chair of the Holyoke City Council's Finance Subcommittee. Members present to my right, Councilor Tallman. To his right, Councilor Anderson Burgos. We are joined by our member Will Powell online, and we are expecting Councilor Jordan shortly. At the moment, that's all the city councilors that are present. We are going to be recorded by Zoom. We're going to be live on the cable access channel. We're going to be streamed, and we are hybrid with Councilor Powell being out of Ward 2. So the chair will entertain a motion that any
votes taken?
Any votes taken to table to nonchalant type votes or can be voice votes, and we'll do a
Roll call.
roll call on all final votes.
So moved.
All those in favor? Any
Aye.
opposed? So moved.
Aye.
Item number 1. Introduced by myself for the mayor, that in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53A, the City Council accepts the provisions of the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources Local Food Council Grant Program, Holyoke Program Economy Coalition, $8,000 no match grants the authorized establishment of fund and/or other method appropriate for the accounting of receipts and expenditures of all resources associated with the said grant. Motion to receive, take off the table.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have our Director of OPED Planning Department, Aaron Vega. Aaron, we welcome you. Would you like to walk us through this grant?
Sure. Thank you, councilors. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking this up. Want to acknowledge that this is another grant that my staff has gone after. I believe it was actually started with our former staffer, Ileana Carrion, who is actually now speaking at a food equity conference right now down at Gateway City Arts, and has been led now by our amazing Massive Motion Coordinator, Stephanie Colon, who I believe is on Zoom. So this is a no-match grant through MDAR to support the work of our Food Policy Council, which is something that we've been putting together over the last year in conjunction with the Massive Motion Grant Award. It was one of the items that we're supposed to be putting together. A similar advisory committee, if you will, to what we did with the Tourism Advisory Committee. So this grant will help sort of spur some of the activities of that, but I would definitely defer to Stephanie to kind of get into the details of the grant. So if you want to allow her to speak as well, she might be able to give you a few more details. There is no match on this grant. Obviously, we've been working closely with MDAR and our partners that Stephanie will mention. Obviously, we do need to spend this in the next 5 to 6 weeks, at least have it encumbered. As I'm learning as I work with our auditor and procurement officers to make sure everything's done correctly. So I thank you for taking this up in a timely manner. But I think Stephanie may have something to add.
Thank you, Aaron. Stephanie, welcome. How'd the boss do?
Hello, he did great. Everything he said is correct. We plan to use the funds to support local food entrepreneurs, so directly to the entrepreneurs, and also using commercial kitchens, so giving back to the economy of the food system in Holyoke. But Aaron said it perfectly. It is a no-match grant, and we have a deadline of June 30th. So yeah, thank you.
How does a food entrepreneur apply or become part of this?
So we have been working with Tessa and Ephra, and she's working with food entrepreneurs to get them ServSafe certified, which would then lead them to be able to open restaurants or, serve their food. And we're working directly with them and also with the TDI Food Economy Coalition that the TDI district has formed to form the Food Policy Council officially for the city of Holyoke.
Thank you.
And with EFRA, Jordan Hart has also helped in the process of choosing the food entrepreneurs. It's going directly through EFRA to get them ServSafe certified.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Make a motion to approve the grant. Match.
Motion made second to approve acceptance of the grant and establishing necessary protocol to monitor the resources and expenditures. If there's no further discussion, roll call vote. Counselor Jordan is now present.
Yes.
Counselor Tallman,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson Burgos.
Yes.
Counselor Powell,
Yes.
Counselor McGivern, yes. So passes 5-0. It'll go next Tuesday to the full city council.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope
Thanks,
the rest
Stephanie.
Hope the rest of the meeting goes just as smooth.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thanks.
Hi, Linda.
Linda, we're also joined in chambers by Counselor Bacon.
Motion to take item number 2 off the table.
Second.
Motion made, second to take item 2 off the table. This is a under Mass General Laws 44, Section 53A, the City Council accepts the Massachusetts Department of, this is the same grant.
Yeah. It's
Okay, we're only going to accept it once.
the overtime one.
Sorry. This is filed under my name for the mayor. This is a request to transfer in the police department from the salary line item known as Sergeant $55,000 into the overtime $55,000. Motion was to take off the table. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. We are joined by Chief Pratt tonight. Chief, welcome. You want to tell us why there's a surplus with the sergeant line item and how you plan to use this?
Yes. Okay, so the surplus basically comes from a vacancy that we had in the sergeants for probably half the year and probably some grant money as well. The reason for the transfer is the bulk of it is needed to cover, when we came before for to cover the cost of the contract, we did not include the overtime retro that would be needed to cover the contract when that money was then distributed out. You know, I noticed that now my calculation of overtime for the year when I was just here, you know, a month or so ago, I thought I was good, but this is what I'm going to need now to get to the end.
This is the, Chief, this is the superior officer and patrolman contracts?
Correct.
Okay. And there'll still be enough money in the sergeant line item for the rest of the year?
Yes.
Is there any discussion?
Make a motion to be approved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded that
Second.
we approve the request for transfer. If there's no further discussion, roll call vote. Counselor Jordan?
Yes.
Counselor Tallman?
Yes.
Counselor Anderson Burgos?
Yes.
Counselor Powell?
Yes.
Counselor McGivern, yes. Passes unanimous. Will be sent to the full city council next Tuesday. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Motion to take item number 3 off the table for discussion.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to take item 3 off the table for discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. This is a copy of the service supplier purchase agreement. It's an agreement that upon execution by all parties shall be effective at the date of execution. And it's the Vanpool Transportation LLC, whose principal office is on 2 Willow Street in Southborough, Mass. If I'm correct, this is a request for a 5-year contract for the school department. Welcome, Anthony Soto, our superintendent.
Yes, and I think Jamie might be online.
We were looking and
I'm not seeing her yet.
Anthony, we got Aaron, and that's about it.
Okay, yeah, I know she was just on the phone and she was gonna be logging in. I know she put a lot of work into this, so.
You want us to wait, or?
No, we could get started. I
Right.
just think whenever she gets in, I wanted to give her an opportunity to speak to the process, but, so yeah, what you have in front of you right now is
Go ahead.
is actually the result of a bid. First and foremost, I want to thank you because 2 years ago, I was in these chambers and I kind of warned the city that like the industry and transportation, the rates are going up. I was reaching out to colleagues across the state who were seeing an average of like 22, 25, 17, just like ridiculous percentage increases. After the pandemic, I think a lot of now when you go lease a car, you're paying over market and things like that. So that industry in itself has the inflation has just really been a bear. So we had an opportunity in front of us to we were in the third year of a contract, and I came in front of the city council and asked you to approve me extending the existing contract for 2 more years, because I thought I could negotiate a pretty good rate with the provider, and I did. It was like 3.5% for the next 2 years. Had we gone out to bid back then, we would have seen a 15% increase for sure. So I think, that strategy with your support, kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit, but it did save us a good $700,000 in the last couple of years. Now that 5-year contract was up, we went out to bid and came here again and asked you if we could put in the bid specs a 5-year, and members requested that when we do actually get the contract to get it back. So we, through the support of your chief procurement officer, who is amazing, by the way. I don't know where you found her, but she is doing an incredible job, supporting, the procurement needs of the city. We worked together, her and Mickey, and they put out the bid specs. And when we got them back, it was as expected, but it was probably worse than I anticipated. I think we were looking at a 15% increase. I thought there was going to be more competition. There was competition. I think there were 2 other vendors that had also put a bid in, and they were nowhere near where Durham came in. But even Durham's rates were, about 15% in total when you factored in the fuel. So we came back and with Jamie, we reached out to every vendor and said, like, hey, what was in our bid specs that caused these inflated rates? Aside from just the market, is there anything we could have changed in our bid specs that would have allowed you to come in a little lower? And they gave us some pointers, and we rejected the bids, and we went out to bid and adjusted some of the bid specs, mainly like the age of the fleet, right? Like that was the biggest thing. We had requested that in the bid specs, with the support of a consultant, we had requested that the age of the fleet be no more than 7 years old, and we upped that to more years, as long as the buses are functioning and we don't have kids stranded on the road, and like they maintain the fleet. Then we were willing to go back out to bid and change that, and we did, and it resulted in Durham again being the low bidder. And it actually was a savings of $2 million over the course of the 5 years. So we were able to reduce the initial budget from what we had provided the mayor initially before we got the bids. We were able to reduce that down by just under $500,000 for this upcoming school year. But when you calculate what the original bid came in at, the lowest bidder, versus what these new rates are, it's a $2 million savings over the course of 5 years. But it's still an increase. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, that the cost didn't go up. I also want to talk to a few of the strategies that the one that I just mentioned was incredible, the extending the contract, the last contract for a couple years. Definitely saved over the course of 2 years about $700,000. But in 2000, before I became superintendent, I tried really hard to convince leadership at the time to allow us to change the start time of Holyoke High School, because Holyoke High School was dead smack in the middle of the tier, so it didn't allow us to tier any buses, and I didn't win that battle. So we had 2 tiers, one at 740, one at 840, and Holyoke High was at like 810. So there was, like, we had some buses on the road, we're paying for 2 hours, and they were only doing runs for about an hour. So it was, I didn't win that, but as soon as I became superintendent, I said, we're changing the start time to 740, and we were able to reduce 4 big buses and I want to say 12 minibuses. And so, like, we're actually down the number of buses that we were 4 years ago, and that was another significant strategy that we have done to try to, now all of our buses are on double tiers. Like we don't have any spare buses to run extra runs, for even like field trips, for example. Like if we wanted to do a field trip right now, it's been a challenge with our existing vendor because, they got to do their run in the morning. The kids can go on a field trip, but the buses have to be back by 2:00. They can't go to the aquarium all day till 5:00 and then come back because we need that driver, we need that vehicle to run the routes. So that's been a challenge this year, but like I think it's a much more, it's just a more efficient way of making sure we're being fiscally responsible with the cost of transportation. So what you have in front of you is the final draft of the contract. It's a 5-year contract, and anytime we even go through a bid process, if the contract is greater than 3 years, we need to get approval from the city council to do that. And the reason why 5 years is better, I mean, if we had done a 3-year contract, the rates would have been higher. It costs these companies an amount to lease these vehicles, an amount to rent space in the area. So when they see a contract for 5 years, they're able to sharpen their pencils a little bit. If they have a contract for 3 years, it makes it more difficult, and the risk is higher, and they end up jacking up the price a little bit.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. We are joined by Jamie Morrow. Jamie, welcome.
Good evening, counselors. Thanks for inviting me here.
Okay. Is there anything you would like to add?
I can just piggyback on what Anthony said. There was a lot of due diligence that went into this school bid and then school transportation rebid. We really looked when it came back. I mean, when it came back, we were looking at almost 33% and 28 to 33% increase in the first year, and we were just sick over it. We knew we couldn't afford it, and we knew we had to try to do things better. So we really did a lot of research. We talked to people, even other communities. We looked at other communities, and I believe in part of the presentations from Mickey or Anthony, there should be a sheet. The school bus prices have gone up across the state. They're looking at numbers of 27% each year. We were able to really save a lot of money. When we went back out to bid, we were looking to even save, if we could save $500,000 at the end of the day, $500,000 can support something else in the city. So we just really, we would have been happy with that. When it came back that we saved $2 million over the 5 years, we were just ecstatic. We looked at every angle. We tried everything we could do to drive these prices down. Like Anthony said, the age of the bus fleet is really what had hurt us in the beginning. We did lengthen the age, but we put in stipulations to protect the city and the students as well. That, if we get reports that buses were late due to, breakdowns or other poor performance, we can request that bus get taken out of the fleet. So we just tried to do whatever we could across the board to maintain the integrity of the transportation for the students and try to save money for the city. So I'm happy to answer any other specific questions about the process or anything we've done. I'm happy to be here to support.
Thank you, Jamie and Anthony. Even though our role is going into a 5-year agreement, the State Council approves it, the thorough explanation is helpful for us to understand why it makes sense to go into 5 years. Is there any discussion from the committee?
I have questions.
Councilor Jordan.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Anthony. How are you tonight? And Jamie, thank you for your work on this. We appreciate it very much. Just a few questions, or I'll try to keep them to a few. First of all, just procedurally, I have two contracts in front of me here. One is for $17.9 million. The other one is for $28 million. Which one's the accurate one, or is it both?
There's two. So one of them is for Vanpool.
Vanpool,
And
okay.
one of them is for Durham. So Durham runs all of our transportation that involves big buses and mini buses, so the yellow buses essentially,
Okay.
which is the bulk of the cost. And then Vanpool, which was another strategy that, we used to do like wheelchair vehicles on the minibuses, and those were like $380 a day.
Right.
And we were able to do it with Durham for $225 a day on their vans. So like we made that change a few years ago. Durham's kind of got a niche on the van market. Like they really do. Like big bus companies, they're not interested in like vans for whatever reason. So
Okay.
Vanpool has really found their niche in the van side of the house. So you could fit no more than like 6 students on vans.
Okay.
On the minibuses, you can go up to like 20, I believe. And then the big buses are like, anywhere between 65 and 75, depending on the size of the bus.
So therefore, in the aggregate, we're looking at $46 million then for the 5 years. I mean, I'm just adding the two numbers together, so I'm just assuming.
Yeah,
that's-
I'd have to go back and do some math, but like, I believe if you, let me just look up our cost. I think it's around, $8 million a year. So when you
Yeah,
when you
8 times
calculate-
5,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's 8 and change.
But I don't, I want to look at the actual number before
Okay.
you take that to the bank.
Okay. I'll wait for you, or if you want me to keep going.
You can keep going, and
Okay.
why don't I just write a note, and then I'll make sure to look that up.
Okay. So, I guess I want to understand, so per year, so year one is 8 million and change, and I guess there's some sort of internal inflator here each year?
Yeah,
Or is it, they just bid it, there's no inflator, but they just take the 46 million and divide it by 5?
no, so the original bid, it had the first year going up by 12.53%, and then every year after that going up by 3.5%,
Okay.
which was a cumulative rate, a cumulative increase of about 26.53%. When we redid the bid, we said like, we wanted to make sure we looked at that, like, how much is this going to cost over the course of the 5 years, and how do we spread that out throughout the life of the contract. So when we went out to rebid, then Durham's rates came back at 4.42, and instead of 3.5 every year, it was 4.5 every year for the next 5 years. So that cumulative rate increase of 26.53% over the life of the contract was reduced to 22.42%.
Okay.
So
What was the year one you said, so you,
year one was originally 12.53 and then 3.5 for the
Yep.
next 4 years. And in the rebid, it's 4.42 and then 4.5 for the next.
okay, so they sort of flatlined it.
Yeah,
They sort of-
flatlined it so that, we're not getting a huge increase next year. And then we just said like, on average, it's about 4.5%
Right,
every year.
okay,
And then on the van side, it was 35% over the course of the 5 years. And I think, Vanpool has been charging us a flat rate like since I've been here. And, quite honestly, I don't know how they have been doing that when everywhere else there was this. So like I expected at some point to see, they're struggling to find drivers.
right,
Their unions are negotiating higher rates, so it costs more to get a driver. So I expected this at some point, but we were able to get Vanpool's initial one was about 35% over the course of 5 years. We got that down to 25%. So initially it was 5% and then 7.5% every year. And with our negotiated reduction, it was 3.5% and then 5.38% after that. I do want to note that as it stands right now, like the city gets 100% reimbursement for the homeless transportation. So that's gonna cost us about $1 million, but the city's gonna get that $1 million back at the following the fiscal year. Like,
So one of the 8 million is attributable to homeless and we get reimbursed for that.
correct.
Okay.
And that money goes straight to the city. That's not money that the school department gets. And I'll say, Counselor Jordan, it's great that it's 100%, because that number when I first started here was about 36%. So we were spending that $1 million and only getting a couple $100,000 back. The city.
Right.
They recognize that this is a huge burden on communities.
Sure.
And,
Was that the McKinney-Vento?
McKinney-Vento,
That's what I
yeah.
thought so, yeah, was the
Yeah.
original act on that,
So-
yeah. We
so
had studied
this-
that a number of years ago, yeah.
yeah, this past year, they did 100%.
Okay.
This year, they're doing 100%, and next year, they're doing 100%. So, like, I closely monitor that, and I work closely with your auditor to make sure, when you're building in the revenues, because we don't see that.
Right.
That just goes to the city, that you're building in the right number. But I think it's important to note that
Yeah.
it's 100% now, and that's great for next year. I don't know, we'll continue to monitor that moving forward.
So, $8 million. So in the aggregate, it sounds like one of them's going up about 3.5, the other one's going up 4.42 for that. So just for the sake of our discussion, 4% increase on 8 million. So this is roughly a $300,000 budget impact, perhaps something in that
I think
vicinity.
it's closer to, I think it's closer to to 6, but that's what I wanted to look up, and I just can't get online. I gotta connect this to my phone.
So for example, yeah, if you could tell us what the year one or this current year, how much we're paying and what year one would be under this.
I can give you right now what's in the mayor's budget, what the increase is for the transportation costs.
And that's
Is that
based
what
on
you're-
this?
And that's based on these rates.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not letting me connect. I'll just have to grab it from my phone, sorry. I don't think it has transportation in it, does it?
It's 8 million, like 8.9. Is that your budget?
Yeah. Look at that.
That's why we call her the sheriff.
Yeah, so that line is. It's about $700,000.
Okay. So I'm just trying to understand the percentages here then. So if it's 8.9 is the new budget, so last year it was 8.2?
Yeah, that's the math that I.
Okay. So you said how much was the van going up per year? What, you said 3.5 in year one?
We're talking purely rates, right? So number of vehicles may have fluctuated.
Oh, I see.
I think we had to add one minibus and one big bus for the upcoming school year.
Okay.
I think there's an opportunity, if and when we get the new middle school, we'll be consolidating 2 schools into one. There'd be another opportunity there to reduce some buses. I think, we would have to go through that process again and look at school start times and
Okay. So 700,000 on 8.2 is about roughly 9% increase. Okay. But you may have expanded. It wasn't just these were the rate increases, but you had some service increases as well that made up the difference.
yeah, I think there's a few pieces. So we have the big bus transportation, which we only had to add one bus. We're up to I want to say, 24 buses, which we were at 19 a few years ago. No, I'm sorry. I take that back. In the other direction, we were able to reduce by 4 buses. So, we had gotten down to 23. We're going up to 24 next year on the big buses. And then on the mini buses, we had at one point 36, and we're down to like 27 through those time changes that I talked to you about, and taking back the routing, right? Like, we used to allow the company to do the routing, and they would tell us how many buses we needed on the road, and I just wanted to make sure we were doing that in-house so that we can make sure, like, nope, these are the routes and this is how many buses we need on the road. So we were able to do that. And then the van piece, there is a piece for wheelchair vehicles.
Okay.
There's a piece for the McKinney Vento, which is the $1 million that
Yep.
will come back to the city. And then there's a piece for out of district. So any out of district schools, like for example, there's a school in Hartford that one of our students goes to. Like, we do that business with the vans as well. So depending on the fluctuation of those students, it could impact the cost.
Do any of our neighbors have Durham also?
Yeah, I believe East Hampton has Durham. They have buses in Worcester. I know they have stuff in Rhode Island. Like, I know East Hampton for sure.
I think Northampton at one time.
Yeah. Springfield has First Student. They didn't bid. So the bidders were DATCO and Durham. Those were the 2 bidders.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if this is legal or it's been explored yet, but is there an opportunity for a regional partnership of multiple communities to get a bulk discount among doing a bidding of this bus services, say Holyoke, Chicopee, Springfield, theoretically, that if we did one together with one company and we partnered, that we could have savings on something like this? Has that ever been explored?
In my 15 years, it is common with the regionals. Like, there's actually, state encourages that to regionalize, but not a municipality our size. I haven't seen that.
Yeah. Do you think with these escalating costs, and this seems to be the trend where we're going, that might be something we want to think about, your partners and people, your colleagues and other communities, our neighbors, that could perhaps, think about doing, how could we strategize? You get more leverage.
Yeah.
You would have an opportunity to have a stronger bargaining position and could get some economies of scale there.
First of all, I think that's a brilliant idea. I just don't know if it's legal. I think I would have to defer to the law department. Like, we could have the law department look into that for sure.
Because we're talking about it with other things like regional dispatch, and we're trying to be innovative on some of these costs. So consider it.
Yeah, look, as long as we can get our students to school on time and safely.
Well, yeah.
I
I think the service would be the same. It's just trying to get it on a bigger scale, these type of things, something for you to consider. The other thing I wanted you
Kevin, if I could just.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You just want to allow Jamie Morrow, our purchasing director, to hop in on that.
Kevin, I just want to add to your point, one thing we explored when we were looking at rebidding and bidding, and something to think about the next round is bidding stimulates competition. However, with a 5-year contract, which was financially sound for the city and did save us money, if we look at the potential, other communities do a 10-year contract because that stimulates more bidding. You would get a company from Florida, from Nevada, from even, local Rhode Island. They would bid on a 10-year contract because it's worth them to invest in coming up this way, buying buses, expanding their company, when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar 10-year contract. So we are looking already at ways to even keep our prices level where they're at and not have these huge increases. Some of them we can't help because of the economy right now, and since COVID, the inflation, 25% has gone up across the board. But we are already looking at ways for the next time this goes out, potentially looking at how other communities have done it with a 10-year bid, and if that stimulated more competition, and there's potential savings down the way. So Mickey and I discussed it. I'm sure Anthony and I, as this is coming back up for rebid, we're going to try to stay, strategic and keep saving the city money.
I think from the camera in the sky, you can see my notes in my margin. It says right here, ask about a longer term contract, because that's exactly what my margin note says right over here. So you're right on the ball, Jamie. That's my next question was, I wanted to think about scale, and I wanted to think about longer term to get greater competition. So, and how does that align with some of, one of the things I wanted you to consider is, if we did 5 years now and, there's other opportunities out there, could we, because of maybe a strategic partner, as you're having these conversations with these other communities, if we could do this, well, their contract's coming up in 5 years, right? So now we could talk about this, or maybe we could have an opt-out, or there's some sort of buyout where we could do this in 3 and partner with this one, and we could do maybe a regional 10-year. I don't know. We just got to get innovative on this type of stuff if we can pull it off, because this stuff is getting so insanely expensive.
Yeah.
I know
we
you guys
do collaborate with other communities. I think you guys will be pleased to see the gas prices that came this year. We collaborated with other communities and did a community bid on gas prices. And we got, under $2 a gallon for unleaded and under $3 a gallon for diesel, where we were in double that last year. So
yeah, that's great.
There is room. So I'll reach out to my networks and let you know if anybody knows if they do this thing, because of the size of the operation already of buses, it may not be feasible, but I can almost guarantee doing a 10-year contract would definitely stimulate more competition, and we would see companies that would start an office out here for a 10-year contract, because it's worth their while, whereas a 5-year may not be. So
yeah, and I'll say a lot of things will happen in 5 years, like in that industry. I'm hoping that, like right now, for example, Vanpool is, they got a pretty good niche on the market, right?
Right.
I hope between now and then, and I like them as a partner, but they are really like the only game in town that could support a district like Holyoke. They're in Springfield as well. One of the things they do like that communities love is you split bill with McKinney-Vento. So wherever the kid is going versus where he lives. Other companies won't do this, but Vanpool actually bills the other community directly and then bills us the other half. As opposed to like us being on the hook for 100% and then trying to go after Springfield and telling them like, you owe us money because for these students. So they've been really good for the last 7 years, and I hope that within 5 years, the other opportunity I think like in 5 years, I think there's another opportunity to say like, hey, if we like this, like, can we extend it? And instead of going out to bid, can we extend it? And you guys need to sharpen your pencil. Like, what could you do? But I don't, we would have to like test out the market. Like, what is it like? What are people seeing? What is Springfield paying? What is East Hampton paying? And see like what other bids are coming in at. But I agree with you. It's getting, it's insane. I had a salad today at Panera Bread, and salad and a drink, $22.67. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. Well, appreciate your efforts. I think we want to be creative on these as much as humanly possible on these as we go forward, and just trying to expand our horizon on some of these potential other opportunities. I think, Jamie, it will be a great help to you. Thank you. I guess at this point you feel this contract will be effective for July 1st?
July 1st.
And obviously you need us to approve this so you can go forward. But your recommendation, Jamie, to us, the Finance Committee, is definitely the 5-year this is the best deal you think we can
Yep.
get at this time versus?
Yep.
Okay.
The other two vendors were like way more expensive than this because they had to move an entire operation here. Durham had, had a little leverage because they're already in town. They already, it wasn't a heavy lift for them.
Okay.
And you will see if you reach out to other communities that across the state, they've seen increases. Some of them as much as 25% in the first year, and then it dropped off, in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. But this is an increase across the board, and I think that Holyoke is actually in a lot better position because of the rebid than many of the other communities that did not rebid.
Because of the rebid and because of your guys' brilliant idea to extend the contract. If we had done this 2 years ago, we would have seen those 25% increases for sure.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both. Any further discussion? Chair, entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the two contracts.
Second.
Motion made and seconded that we approve both contracts, allowing the school department on behalf of, with the city to go out to bid for 5 years, to go out to contractual for 5 years. This is a roll call vote. If there's no further discussion, Councilor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilor Tallman?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson Burgos?
Yes.
Councilor Plowell?
Yes.
Councilor McGivern, yes. That passes unanimous and will be referred to the full city council next Tuesday. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, a motion to take items 4 and 5 together as a package?
Second.
Motion made second to suspend our rules to take up both items 4 and 5 as a package. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? So moved. Item 4 is an order introduced by Councilor Bacon. The city complies with Mass General Law 62A, and the required environmental notification form is filed with the school for the school project, so the Secretary of Environmental Affairs can make a determination on whether environmental impact report is required prior to any application for financial assistance. If the environmental notification form is filed before May 16th, the city council meeting, it'll be provided as a communication to the city council. That's item number 4. Item number 5 is a report and communication from Brendan Consulting. Both of these off the table. All those in favor? Any opposed? So moved. For discussion. Councilor Bacon, as the maker of the order, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the reason that I filed this order is because, and it was pretty far into the whole discussion and planning relative to this project, but it was at that time that I became aware that there was a concern by one of our residents in my ward relative to a technical requirement relative to the entire application and complying with the state law. And so because it was brought to my attention, and it's certainly not something I'm any expert in, I put the order forth out of a concern that we follow all of the regulations correctly and don't open ourselves up to any potential liability down the road. I guess there's been a couple of situations where certain things led to some legal matters, and so I thought it was better to address it before we go another step ahead, just to make sure we have everything in order and are in compliance. So that's the backdrop to filing it, and it was my understanding that it was a technical requirement. That's all I have on that. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could take a quick minute, Councilor Tessa Murphy Ramboletti has joined us online. We also have a number of attendees who are not in the panelist room. You have two choices. I see a number of building committee members in the attendees. Anytime you wish to speak or participate, or if you wish to join the panel, just raise that or hit that yellow hand, and Jeff will bring you in, or will recognize you certainly for speaking at any time for the next 4 items.
Oh, and Mr. Chairman, if I might add,
Councilor Bacon.
if the committee would consider the comments that have put forth relative to this order, I believe you have a hard copy of them.
So moved.
Thank you.
Motion made and second to receive.
There was commentary that came in. There was a statement, and I believe you were given a copy, Mr. Chairman, as well as the president, and I believe it was forwarded to the law department, who I believe also sent it over perhaps to the schools relative to, so that Brennan Consulting could comment on it.
I can return this to the committee. I picked this up from the table.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Chairman,
And-
if I could, when you have a moment. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, so just for purposes of receiving the comments with the concerns of Brennan Consulting's presumptions, just to receive all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Anthony, did you want to weigh in on this?
I would love for Margaret to step in. She's
Okay.
the project and is,
Mr. Chairman, could I make a suggestion?
Yep.
I think it might be helpful so that for the listening audience and all of the benefit of the committee, I don't know how much you've studied Mr. Smith's concerns or questions. So I think it might be helpful if we suspended the rules, took 5 to 6 minutes, allow Mr. Smith, if he wants to address the committee, raise his points, giving a summary. And then I think it would be perfect for Margaret to say, these are our thoughts. We've looked at this, and then these are our response to that. Does that make sense?
I haven't seen his comments, so I need a minute to digest them anyway.
Oh, okay, good. Even better.
Now it really makes sense.
Hard to comment on something you haven't seen.
The
Yeah.
chair will entertain the motion that Tom Smith be allowed to
He'll give his name and address. He's from Holyoke.
suspend the rules and be allowed to approach and to
you-
address
Michael.
the committee on these issues and concerns with Brennan Consulting. On that motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? So moved. Tom, welcome. You've
sure the
broken
mic's
some records. I've got some of the longest emails in my career as a city councilor, and I have to say, I just finished reading most of them. And, but I did not get this until this evening about I did see your email on some of these points, though.
I think the quickest
But-
way to get through this is
Could you first just give us
Okay.
your on the record, full name
Address.
and address?
Thomas P. Smith, 211 Appermont Highway, Holyoke.
Thank you. The mic is yours.
Mike's mine? See ya.
Take it home with you.
I think the most efficient way is for me to go, not through every one of these, but pretty much that. The taxpayers issue raised that I don't think was adequately addressed in Brennan Consulting's response is this. Did the city notify the Secretary of EEA of the project within the statutory and regulatory timeline? To not submit an environmental notification form, ENF, but to notify the Secretary per the laws. The project proponent analyzes the project's environmental impacts and determines whether or not the proponent has to inform the Secretary of EEA of the project. That's false. The project proponent doesn't make that sole determination. If they did, nobody would inform the EEA because they'd want to get they wouldn't want anything to potentially get in the way of their projects. That's why the EEA Secretary reviews the project for the people and then makes a determination on what level of environmental review is required. It's not Brennan Consulting's job to do that. The project proponent's statutory and regulatory responsibility is to notify the Secretary in accordance with General Law, Chapter 30, Section 62A, and the EEA's own regulation, 301 CMR, which is Code of Massachusetts Regulations, 11.05. The taxpayer is concerned with the fact that the project proponent has not notified the Secretary, and the standing issue relates to the public's rights to be allowed early and timely opportunities to submit comments to the Secretary if the project warrants an environmental review. Again, it's not Brennan Consulting's job to determine whether the level of environmental review. It's the proponent's job to notify the secretary. Number 5, indeed, the lack of project notification to the secretary may certainly infringe upon the rights of the public to submit comments, when those comments could have meaning. The issue isn't whether or not the project proponent must file an environmental notification form. The issue raised is, did the project proponent notify the secretary in the first place? Because it's the secretary's job to determine if an ENF is required or environmental impact report. The laws require the project proponent, I did that one. Let me see. Brennan Consulting admits that the project falls within the jurisdiction of MEPA. MEPA is the Massachusetts Environmental Protect Act. The MEPA office is manned by EEA employees that review notifications and then make recommendations to the secretary as to what level of environmental review should be recommended by the secretary. Number 10, it is in its response to the taxpayers, Brennan Consulting included a MEPA review threshold questionnaire. I've been dealing with MEPA issues for 12 years. I've never heard of a threshold questionnaire. I've scoured mass.gov, the EEA's website. I have 5 emails to EEA employees in the MEPA office I sent this morning, I haven't heard back, asking them, is there such a thing as a MEPA review threshold questionnaire? Is that questionnaire a state document? I don't know. I don't think so, but it could be, but we don't know. Okay, 14, almost done. Has Brennan Consulting been authorized to be the sole determining body that decides whether or not the city has to submit an environmental notification form? The project already meets the requirement by seeking financial assistance for a review by the MEPA office. It is the MEPA office's personnel's responsibility to review documents and provide recommendations to the secretary. The purpose of notifying the secretary early is to allow the public an opportunity to provide meaningful input about a project's impact to the environment. Notifying the EEA when the concrete's being poured takes away the public's right for meaningful input, because no one's going to make the city tear down the foundation. Meaningful input has to happen early before decisions are made. That's what the law means. Okay? A new school on an existing site is not a change in use, and extensive EEA review may not be required. But nonetheless, the statutes and regulations still require that the project proponent notify the Secretary of EEA early, so if more in-depth environmental review is required, the public is allowed to enjoy its statutory and regulatory rights to meaningful participation. The applicable state law, again, Chapter 30, Section 62A, the applicable regulation that mirrors the state law is 301 CMR 11.05. The goal is to ensure the rights of the public are equally protected, and those rights are governed by the laws. Thank you.
Tom, thank you.
I won't get into detail, but I've discovered something in the plans that's very concerning, and I would highly question whether those plans or the statements made by Brennan Consulting are accurate. Thank you.
Superintendent, Margaret, did you want to weigh in?
So, I had Margaret Hood. So I'm Margaret Wood. I'm the owner's project manager with Answer Advisory. You know, I hadn't seen these comments before tonight, but I appreciate Mr. Smith's input. I would like to hear more about that last comment. I'm not a civil engineer. I'm sort of the manager for the project, so I am not going to try to respond to this today. What I can tell you is that the process that we've gone through here, which has been to have the civil engineer assess the MEPA thresholds and provide that input, is the standard process for the MSBA schools and also for all the charter schools I've worked on. So I'm not saying that Mr. Smith is wrong, because he sounds like he actually knows a lot more about environmental regulations than I do as an owner's project manager. But I will say the process we're following is typical, and I will also say that we shared the memo that Brennan drafted with the MSBA, and they didn't have any additional comments. So obviously we need to follow up. I just want to back up a little bit here and sort of summarize for those who may be dropping into this a little bit cold, sort of where this started. So Mr. Smith sent an email to some of the city councilors a few weeks ago, and we had Brennan Consultant provide a memo that sort of was the response that he's looking at. So again, I'm not saying that he's not correct, but it's not the process that I'm familiar with, and obviously we need to do some homework about it. And I believe the memo is now in the public domain if anybody wants to see that, right? Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Smith, I guess I would say to you, please, on the issue that you expressed concern about in your testimony, I hope you will follow up with me or with others on the project to let us know what your concern is.
I need to see larger images of the plan. I just have 8.5 by 11.
Yep. Okay, we can definitely provide those. So that's what I can tell you for today, but we'll follow up with Brennan
So
tomorrow.
the MSBA is aware of the concerns that have been brought to our attention.
Yeah.
And
I shared Mr. Smith's email, and I shared Brennan's response, because they obviously they look very carefully at their pipeline, and they want to know if there's something that's being raised in the public domain that could be a concern or could cause a delay in the project. So.
And they are the financial assistance provider, or on behalf of the state, I guess I would say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess what I would say is that they are not supposed to fund a project that doesn't satisfy this questionnaire. So, like Mr. Smith, I couldn't open the regulations and point to where it is, but the format of the questionnaire is a standard questionnaire that is typically filed with sort of early level permitting documents, and it captures the mechanics of how this law actually gets played out, so that there's a threshold below which review isn't required, or a series of thresholds below which they aren't required. If you hit any of those thresholds, you do have to go through more detailed environmental permitting. In this case, per Brennan's memo, we don't. So his question remains when we need to respond to, which is that the end of it? Do we not have to say something to MEPA? I've never done that, but I'm not saying that I've always done it right. So
that was my final question: was have you ever done that, or another community that you were aware of?
Never.
Have ever done it?
Never. Okay. I mean, I have done it in situations where we were doing something that was out above the threshold. Obviously, I worked on a project in Salem recently that involved coastal permitting, and we had to do all the permitting. But that specifically met one of these was above or sort of checked one of these thresholds, and that was how it was different.
Yeah. Thank you. Just so everybody knows, we are also joined online from the Law Department Attorney Mike Bissonette. Councilor Anderson Burgos?
Yeah, I just have a quick question for Mr. Smith. I'd like to know what your profession is.
Professor at Technical Community College, Landscape Design and Management. I have a degree in horticulture.
Can you please come up to the mic? Thank you.
I'm a professor in Landscape Design and Management at STCC. My education is in horticulture, landscape architecture, and regional planning. and I have a master's in education.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And Councilor Jordan.
Okay. Margaret, question. Obviously, we have the dingle, and whatever little you know about the environmental regulations, take mine about 3 notches further down the pedestal is where I'm at with some of this stuff, because it's very complex and it's not an area of law that I focus on. So, but let me ask some basic questions here. Hopefully you can help me with this level of detail. We have a dingle next to this, right? We're talking about doing an amount of demolition here. We also have Crozier Field.
Yeah.
I know from having been involved when I was on the Board of Trustees of a community college or different things. I mean, we wanted to put a back access road to go to, Route 202.
Right.
And oh my heavens, I mean, we had to talk to Natural Heritage and we needed this permission. And
I think you hit some thresholds.
yeah, underground tunnels exactly. But I guess my question is there someone actually going out there and checking to see that there isn't the spotted salamander that's in the, or this is some snake trail through the dingle, or there's a certain species of bird at Crozier in the woods that are there that is impacted?
This question.
I mean, because I ask it because I don't want us to find out later that these things have not been, that someone actually in this whole process of all of our experts and consultants and everything is examining these questions. And then the other piece of that is that, underground water. We also have considerations about Crozier Field is protected parkland and designated parkland.
Right.
And are we doing anything in any way that impedes on that or puts walls or changes that needs further permissions of this? My question is, do you examine this level of detail in these projects and have someone looking at this so we don't get further down the line, we get bit on one of these issues? Margaret, please, whatever.
So let me you cited 3 specific aspects of the permitting process. So let me kind of take them one at a time. And there are probably others, but they're good ones. So on the habitat issue, if you delve into Brennan's memo, one of the thresholds is habitat. And so the mechanics of that is that the state has some pretty amazing maps online that map habitat. So what Brennan has done here is that they've gone to those maps, and I'd be happy to sort of dig up and send you the screenshots of the maps. They've gone to those maps and they've concluded from the basis of the state's maps that there is no habitat there that anyone is aware of at the time, and that's not. So that's the habitat question. The Crozier Field question is also a good one. I will say that it's Chapter 97. We're not allowed to touch it. In the many years I've been working on this project, we have had people say, what if we did this on Crozier Field? What if we do that? And it's like, no, it's controlled. To make any changes, as most of you may know, you have to go through the legislature to make changes to.
It's very difficult process.
So
yes.
It's sacrosanct. The boundary of work, or what's called the limit of work on the construction documents, will clearly state that the contractor is not allowed to touch this, and we, as the team sort of doing the pre-construction development, are not allowed to propose any changes to that. Mm-hmm. Not that you couldn't, but I think it would probably be something that would lead this project on a tail wagging the dog kind of exercise. So that's, to me, off the table on any public school project where time is of the essence and trying to get new facility online. And then the other comment you made, and understood this is like you've picked 3, there are tons of others.
Just a few aspects, exactly.
Right. So underground streams. So we do have to, as part of the design process, we do borings. Basically drill into the ground to look for both groundwater and just soil. It's mostly about soil condition. So nothing has been found on the site that indicates there's any kind of water condition. I mean, I will say generally, whenever you have a condition where there's sort of big changes in grade, you can somehow have unusual water conditions. But if you think about the condition of Peck now, and I know Whitney's here, you know, the existing Peck building has floor levels that are several stories below grade, as well as to my knowledge, there's never been a water issue with the existing building. Whitney, is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Interior, as opposed to the building envelope, so. So I think that also indicates that that particular issue, which is a reasonable thing to ask about, is not an issue on this site.
And I was just wondering, I mean, there is some changes to the footprint, obviously, right? So perhaps while there isn't a water issue today, with the new footprint, are we interfering with the way, you know, I see there's going to be a parking lot in the back, or at least that was on the map. And,
Yeah.
you know, my only point is not to micromanage that stuff from my side of the house, but I just want to make sure that the city is protected and that these developers and these experts that we're hiring us are examining all these questions so that really articulate, great citizens like the Tom Smiths of the world that come forward and it has these issues, that these things are being officially addressed and to everyone's satisfaction, so that, you know, again, looking out for the city and, for that matter, indemnifies the city, right? We're paying for experts on all these areas. So we're protected against liability. If Brennan's Consulting, for example, turns out they were wrong, right? And this thing did require it. And a year from now, 10 taxpayers say, hey, I didn't have my right to have a process on the new school or whatever, right?
Yeah.
They're going to indemnify us for our loss. You know what I'm saying? That there's professional liability coverage to protect the city, so that we're bringing in the right team to make sure all these questions are examined. Is that fair?
So it is fair. Yes, the design team does carry liability insurance. I will say, this isn't going to come up in a year. We're going to answer this question in a week tops.
Okay, great.
Okay, and I don't think it's a super complicated question. To your issue about grading, the way to understand what happens here is, yes, we're completely changing the grading on the site. And it is incumbent on the two components of the design team who are really involved with doing that, which is the landscape architect and the civil engineer, to grade the finished site so that water is not an issue in the building or on the site. And, you know, again, it's a pretty steep and complex site, so this is, you know, a challenging issue. But I think so far the team's done a great job, and I'm happy to have Mr. Smith take a look at what they've done. And if what he's looking at is trying to figure out what that is on an 8.5 by 11, that would be a miserable task, because really it's quite detailed on the full-size drawings.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of possibly oversimplifying this, what I'm hearing is, if the analysis of Brennan Consulting is correct, and I'm willing to assume it is, and that they're the experts in what they are putting forth, then it would seem to me a very simple thing to file that environmental notification form, because apparently the project would not rise to requiring a more intensive review, and then the regulation of giving the notice would be met. That's just on the face.
I would agree.
What it looks like to me.
If it's required, but I'm not convinced it's required yet.
Okay.
If I become convinced it is required, we will absolutely follow.
So I think that is the question at hand.
Yep.
But all
Totally
other
agree.
things being equal, it would appear that if the notice was filed and the regular review is done, it would not appear to rise to the level of needing an in-depth review based on what I gleaned from the information, but.
Yeah, the only other comment I'll add is I do, and I think many of you here did join the community meetings. We have had community meetings on this project, so it's unfortunate Mr. Smith wasn't aware of them, but and they certainly weren't super technical, but that is why we have this process here. So I'm grateful for his input, and we will definitely follow up.
I see.
Oh, you in charge?
No, I'm just.
wanted to get a
Yeah.
Councilor Anderson Burgos.
Ms. Woods, I'd like to ask, how often have you worked with Brennan Consulting?
Well, I will say we are working with them now on at least one other project, but I also want to be clear, they're not my consultant.
No, right, but
Right, the
as part.
architects work with them 100% of the time.
And how many schools have you overseen being built?
20?
20. Has this ever arisen before?
Yes. So we have had we had a project where we were right across the street from Franklin Park in Boston, which triggered review by the Parks Department. I don't think we've ever had a school that triggered the site requirement in terms of kind of sheer area, because the school sites tend to have, fairly limited sites. But yeah, that one I can think of was the Parks Department, and it was also part of a redevelopment. That school was on the site of a redevelopment of what had formerly been a mental health institution. And so there were other it was an amendment of an existing EIR in order to do the school.
So out of all the comments or the bullet points that Mr. Smith has made, have any of these concerns come up before? That's what I'm asking.
No.
No. Okay, so this
For
is
me,
for you.
not a civil
Yeah, but out of 20 schools, this is
Yeah.
this is the first time we're seeing something like this.
Yep.
Okay, that's all.
But I
that's-
mean, it's a legitimate question.
It is a legitimate question. I just find it like it's never come up before, and all of a sudden here we are.
Yeah.
We've been fighting for new schools, and now it's coming up again. It's coming up like out of the blue. You've had
Well, and
plenty
this-
of time
this
for
was
the
why-
for the public to comment, and
This
so
was
they
why
picked a
I
date like
shared
today.
this with the MSBA,
Yeah.
because I never assume that I've seen every
Right.
quirk of this process, and
Okay.
they kind of nodded and said this covers all of the questions that we would have
Mm-hmm.
about this issue, and did not raise anything further. So
Thank you.
They see more schools than I do, frankly. So.
Thank you.
With, I certainly recognize if any threshold is met, that we would file with the EEA secretary or of course under MEPA guidelines and rules and regs. If the thresholds aren't met though, I don't think we should file. And I say that with all due respect, because you also mentioned national heritage, I think. And, Councilor Jordan talked about the access road from Holyoke Community College to Route 202. That's an even bigger issue because the city built a compost pile, which we did for all the right reasons for our residents, on the other side of where that road was built.
Yep.
And because we built a compost pile, it became a man-made natural habitat for snakes, particularly copperhead snakes. Now, these copperhead snakes, as we all know, come from Mount Tom. How did they get over to the compost pile? Very simple. They come across East Hampton Road by the log cabin, for which Natural Heritage told the owners of the log cabin they could not expand the footprint of where they have their proposed Delaney Marketplace. So I'm all in favor of protecting natural habitat, and I'm not against protecting snakes, but let's let common sense prevail too.
Right.
But Margaret, you're absolutely right. If a threshold is met, and Mr. Smith is absolutely right, we have to file, and there's no question about that.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Jordan.
Yeah, just before we wrap up, Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with those comments. I think my only concern is just making sure that the city is protected and listening to citizens. I think Mr. Smith, quickly, Mr. Chairman, I think he had his hand up. You wanted to
I
make
actually have one question, not one question, but one concern.
Okay.
Tom, if you want to come back up.
Could you come back up, Tom? Real quick?
But my concern is the one thing we can't answer this evening is if this is not filed, a public comment cannot be made with the EEA. Is there a reason why someone can't make a public comment to the EEA even though the environmental application has not been
No,
filed?
there's no reason, but again, the statute and the regulation don't have prerequisites to notify the EEA. There's no prerequisite in the law that says, well, you got to make sure there's no thresholds met. No, it says if the project is seeking financial assistance, you have to notify the EEA. It's not an option. So you have to notify them. Then, as far as the environmental notification form is, the EEA will tell you if you have to file an environmental notification form. And you don't, the project proponent doesn't determine the thresholds. The EEA reviews the project, and they'll maybe find the thresholds, depending on what you submit in an ENF, if you have to file one, or in the project documents. So I think my recommendation is get on the phone tomorrow, call the MEPA office, explain the project, explain, what Brennan consultant said, and send them my comments too. But the law is the law. And if we don't have the law, we don't have our liberty, we don't have our freedom.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom.
All right, so I think we've complied with this, Mr. Chairman, unless we think we need to table it for more information. Other than that, I think we've complied with it, but if there's more later, Margaret, sounds like you're gonna look into this for us and take it from there, and we'll seek guidance from you, right?
Yeah, I will look into it. I mean, I'm going to make a general comment, and again, sort of say, I don't even play a civil engineer on TV, but, I think the notion that there are thresholds for permitting requirements and that the determination of the thresholds is by the proponent but subject to the review of the community is fairly standard. I mean, again, back to Mr. Anderson Burgos's question, I mean, I don't believe, and I could be wrong, but I do not believe that every single project of any size files one of these forms with MEPA. They would lose their minds, right? So it is, back to your liability question,
Right.
it is delegated to an engineering firm like Brennan to make this determination, and their licensing is on the line, right? And that is what the state is depending on, and why they're creating a threshold that there is a point below which you do not need to do this.
Let me ask you a real simple question. Could it be as simple as we call them and say, we're building a school in Holyoke. Is this something that requires us to report or file anything with you? And then if they'll just say, no, you're all set. You don't need to do anything. Or yes, you do. And then maybe we should just get it from the horse's mouth. I don't know.
Well, so I'm super curious about this now because certainly if this came up again in the future, I would want to know. I think that I believe that we owe Mr. Smith a response in writing, and so I need to figure out what the best way to provide that is.
Okay.
I'm not going to promise that we're going to get something in writing from MEPA because they're not easy to get hold of.
Oh, okay.
Witness the fact that he called them 4 times today and didn't hear back from them. And they create these thresholds so that they don't have to look at every project of every size,
Okay.
any size.
All right.
All set.
Good discussion.
Chair would suggest that item, Chair would suggest that item 4 has been complied with, and we can report that back to the full city council, so the
moved.
discussion here.
Second.
On that motion, roll call, Councilor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilor Tallman?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson Burgos?
Yes.
Councilor Powell?
Yes.
Councilor McGivern? Yes, that's unanimous, and we'll report this out to the full city council. I would suggest item 5 that we keep in our file, in our archive, along with Mr. Smith's comments and points, so we can refer to them later if we need down the road, but have them for future reference.
All right, I would make a motion to put item 5, the materials from Brennan and from Mr. Smith in the Finance Committee file for posterity in our records and as a reference documents.
A second.
Motion made and second on that motion. Roll call. Counselor Jordan?
Aye.
Counselor Tomlin?
Aye.
Counselor Anderson Burgos?
Aye.
Counselor Powell?
Yes.
Counselor McGivern, yes. So done. Thank you, everybody, and
Mr. Chairman?
much appreciated. Counselor Bacon?
Just as a point of order, will the response relative to the question be later included in the record?
Right, if we get something back from Margaret, you mean?
Yes.
You'll send us whatever you're going to come up with, right, Margaret? Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, good.
The chair would suggest, rather than putting them together, that just for procedural, that we go quickly take up item number 6.
Motion to take item number 6 off the
Second.
table.
Motion made and second to take item 6 off the table for discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item 6 is the original order with the bond that would complement the request for the middle school project. Item number 6 has a replacement bond with item number 7. So as we need to do procedure, I suggest we receive item 6, refer it back to the auditor and mayor for disposal.
So moved.
Motion made and second to
Yeah.
receive item
Second.
6, refer back to the auditor and mayor for disposal. Roll call. All those in favor? Counselor
Aye.
Jordan?
Yes.
Counselor Tomlin?
Yes.
Counselor Anderson Burgos?
Yes.
Counselor Powell?
Yes.
Counselor McGivern, yes. So that is done. And now we have item number 7.
Motion to take item number 7 off the table.
Second.
Motion made and second to take item 7 off the table for discussion. This is the meat of the Finance Committee's discussion tonight, that the city appropriate the amount of $85,504,592 for the purpose of for the purpose and introductions of paying cost for the construction of the new Peck School, 1916 Northampton Street, Holyoke, including the payment of all costs incidental or related thereto to the project, with the school facility shall have an anticipated useful life as an educational facility for the instruction of school children for at least 50 years, for which the city may be eligible for the grant from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, said amount to be expended upon the direction of the School Building Committee. To meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with the approval of the mayor, is authorized to borrow said amount under Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, pursuant to any or other enabling authority. The city acknowledges that the MSBA's grant program is a non-entitlement discretionary program based on need, as determined by the MSBA, and any project cost the city incurs in excess of the grant approved by and received from the MSBA shall be sole responsibility of the city. Provided further that the grant the city may receive from the MSBA for the project shall not exceed the lesser of 80% of eligible approved project cost as determined by the MSBA, or 2, the total maximum grant amount determined by the MSBA. Provided that the appropriation hereunder shall be subject to and contingent upon the cities being awarded a grant from the MSBA for the project, and that the amount of borrowing authorized pursuant to this vote shall be reduced by any grant amount set forth by the project funding agreement that may be executed between the city and the MSBA, and further ordered that the treasurer is authorized to file an application with the appropriate officials of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, known as the Commonwealth, to qualify under Chapter 44A of the general laws, any and all bonds of the city authorized as of the date hereof, and to provide such information and execute such documents as such officials of the Commonwealth may require in connection therewith. This was received as a replacement language for our bond for the middle school project, received on May 2nd, referred to the committee. It has been signed off by Mayor Garcia. As we begin our discussion, our second round of discussion on this, to Mayor Garcia and members of the building committee, our chair, Aaron Burnell, any members, Mark, anyone, would you like to come in and join us? Whitney, Rory, our city treasurer, and as I stated before, we are joined online by a number of building committee members and other school officials. Aaron Linville is online, and we are here. to do our second discussion on the middle school project. Just a quick, as everybody's grabbing a seat, our first go-around, we went through a very thorough presentation of what the building committee has done over the last, about a year and a half, Aaron? Yeah, a wonderful job, and we thank the mayor and all the members of the committee and the school committee, too. We also are joined by at least one other school committee member, I believe.
I know the school committee chair, Margaret, Mildred
Yeah,
Lefebvre.
Mildred Lefebvre is online. So we have the presentation. I think we know what is being proposed. I think we know why it's being proposed. And how it's going to take place is evolving, as Margaret Wood, project manager, is with us also. I think what we're coming down to in the city council at this point is how we're going to pay for it and to fine tune some things that have already been discussed. Mayor, I see you're ready to jump on right away.
Thank you so much, Counselor, and I know you thanked everyone on the building committee and everybody here, but also I want to extend that thank you to each and every one of you. Because like I said last time, and I tell everybody, all these years of discussion that's got us to this point has really been a community effort to reconcile everyone's thoughts in this process and produce a product that reflects the concerns and the desires and the needs of everybody. So I want to thank the members of the council as well for contributing strongly to that conversation and that process. The last time we were here, we were really given two assignments. One to amend the language and the voter authorization. The other one was to come back with a summary, an overview of some capital needs for the city. So just to start with number one, are there any questions on the amendment to the language? Are we good there?
Any discussion from members of the committee? Treasurer?
I'm assuming, I'll answer a question with a question. Is that I'm assuming the bond council has reviewed it. I know that she had pointed out certain language. In particular, there was the point about particular language had to be in here so that we could access the state's credit rating so that we would get a lower interest rate. Is that language now included in this language? So we're good there?
It is, yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And the second point?
Yeah, and Rory and I are actually going to tag team on this because him and I have been working together through this before this question was brought up or this request was brought up, and then even more now since this request come up. And before I pass it, I just want to say that it's been a great exercise. Capital planning hasn't really been the city's strong suit. I don't have to preach to you. You've been around longer than me. And certainly you have members at City Hall currently between the auditor, myself, the treasurer, really trying to rethink how we proactively plan for our needs. And that capital document continues to evolve as we go forward, and this exercise only helps continue to promote that existing effort. But, Mr. Treasurer?
Yeah, and before we get started with that, I know that there's a presentation, I believe one of the members that's online, if Jeffrey is able to, I just texted and they said they just need the access to share the screen.
Is it, the chair recognizes Aaron Linville, and Jeffrey, can we share, make Aaron a co-host?
Should be all set.
Aaron, welcome.
And before we get into the meaty part of the conversation, I know that Margaret and Anthony, Aaron, and the mayor just want to give a brief update on some of the other milestones that have happened and some other project updates since we met in April.
So I will take the lead here. So the biggest milestone, this is the consultant team in partnership with the building committee, is that we submitted the schematic, we made the schematic design submission to the MSBA on time. As I think I talked about when I was here last. It's the critical funding milestone. Out of it comes the project funding agreement. So that was received. As some of you probably know, the MSBA board meeting that it's headed for is June 21st. It is during this period of time after we make the submission, the MSBA does a very detailed review of the submission. And I'm happy to report that they scheduled, I checked another box with them last week, which was we had the facilities assessment subcommittee meeting, which was a meeting. They have a sort of peer group of their board who look at the overall project and provide comments. So that went very well. It was actually the shortest facilities assessment subcommittee I've ever been, because sometimes they're quite long. And then this past Monday, we had another milestone, which is not on here, which was we had the quote-unquote project funding agreement meeting. So in the project funding agreement meeting, they represent the project budget that has been presented to them in the schematic design submission, and basically said they didn't really have, they had a couple of very minor comments, none of which changes the kind of overall budget, which is great. This to me is a major part of my job, is to try to get it to capture when it's presented to you and before they've had a chance to review it, to capture everything that can reasonably be anticipated. So the number at the bottom of the page is still the number at the bottom of the page as far as that total project budget. And that's a very good thing. And it represents a really significant milestone. There's two small things that we have to follow up with on them, but basically what they are saying by sort of holding that meeting is we are now ready to write the board recommendation. So it means that we have threaded the needle of the MSBA process. And again, a couple of minor things to follow up on, mostly just a couple of programming questions that Mount Vernon Group is thrashing through right now. But we are headed for the board meeting is, I would say, the big takeaway. And then the last one on here, the agreement with HG&E, I'm going to let Whitney talk about because he's really been leading the charge on this.
Throughout the course of the previous design, the facility was going to utilize a heat pump technology, which is current in many regards, but it has some drawbacks. And for the larger facilities, such as what we're proposing here now, the drawbacks are the life expectancy of the primary equipment and the complexity of the installation. So combined with the...
And the cost.
And the cost, yes, absolutely. And, never mind just the idiosyncrasies of all of the equipment. Yeah, it's more expensive. So be that as it is, what we find now is that being under a moratorium for natural gas, there are opportunities still for ratepayers to take advantage of certain connected demands which currently exist, which can be transferred to a new opportunity or utilization within an existing property designation, such as what we have here. Right. That would be the hot water system, the domestic water, and some of the kitchen current utilization. On top of that, there also can be a utilization of a primary heat source or an expanded utilization of natural gas if it is on an interruptible basis. And what that means is, though, during times of peak usage, usually during the winter months when the G&E has to import additional supplies to augment their current usage, then we would have an opportunity with this facility to go onto an alternate fuel source in order to reduce that demand according to their requirement, and then provide them with that opportunity to balance their loads, but still be able to, for the lion's share of the actual utilization of heat in this instance, to take advantage of the natural gas utility. That gives us more traditional systems that can be integrated into the design of the facility with greater proven longevity of service, much more economical and traditional for the particular design of which this model school represents. So it wouldn't involve a complete redesign of those primary systems. That's it in a nutshell. But also, we have utilized this in the past. So in the past, we've utilized this interruptible service previously at Kelly School. And in that ward in particular, it offered us a better rate, a primary rate of utilization per the measurable amount for the natural gas. And also gave the G&E the benefit of still being able, because they like to sell the gas, but just at that squeaky time when it's really heavily used, then they have a crunch. And so this would offer us a better overall rate throughout the entire calendar year, as well as just this slight interruptible. And the interruptible component, historically, with the relatively mild winters we've been having as of the last 5 to 10 years, have been relatively insignificant as far as the utilization of that service. So it's a good move, and it's a great opportunity for us.
It's actually really a big deal, and Whitney is 100% responsible for working it out.
Well, and working with all the members of the department in the G&E, we're also utilizing some other conversations in regards to solar capability and some creative ways in order to store it, such as what the city and the gas and electric currently does up at Mount Tom Roses, where they have battery banks of which they're able to utilize the energy in a stored form and then bring it back. And the G&E is also interested in combining with us on that in order to utilize the stored energy potential we have for approximately 5 megawatts of power that we could generate from that.
Councilor Jordan has a question.
Oh, yeah, thank you. By the way, we had an extensive ordinance committee meeting last night talking about battery storage facilities, which ones would be of large scale, small scale. So I think this would probably be in the large scale category. Is this new information relative to the gas, is this now incorporated in the $86 million number? Is there a potential design savings at all?
There is a potential design savings. Hypothetically, it was originally proposed when the initial engineering opportunities were made available to the School Building Advisory Committee. There was a component there for geothermal. There was a component there for air-to-air heat pumps. There was the traditional component for a natural gas or a fossil fuel-based system. So it's anticipated there may be, and again, it depends on the total implementation of that system, because there are connected opportunities whereby the solar may be utilized to offset some of the water heating, the domestic water heating. And so consequently, there's a compounding here opportunity, again, that has not truly come to fruition, because it will be a joint venture with the gas and electric department in order to utilize their design services and also to obtain the greatest amount of benefit.
Okay.
So it's still shaking down, Keb.
Okay, so you'll debrief us as that gets, that sort of cloudy crystal ball gets clearer to you. You'll advise us. Okay, that's really helpful. And I was going to ask you, I do know the interruptible rate does get a significantly reduced rate.
Yeah.
So that also would help you, I think, significantly
throughout the lifespan of the building.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's great news, Whitney. I appreciate that update. Thank you.
Absolutely. Brian Roy from the Gas and Electric has been pivotal with
He's
this.
great. Yeah. Brian's awesome. Yeah.
It's been super. And John Zwerko on the solar end.
John as well. Yep.
Chair, Building Committee, Aaron Bruno.
Oh, I was just gonna comment that, some of these savings that we're seeing, if we decide not to have impact our overall budget, will get us our Dingle Road that we want so much.
There you go. That helps.
This was a really big deal when Mr. Anderson brought this to the committee. It's something that we've been striving for, because it will have substantial cost savings, like he said, not just from the start, but for the overall life of the building. So.
Nice. Margaret?
So, as the mayor mentioned, and I know it was something that had come up at the last meeting, and certainly something that's been an ongoing conversation for a long time, is identifying other capital needs. Last meeting, I think we did a pretty good job of demonstrating the ability to afford this long-term debt service within the existing city budget based on some very conservative assumptions. And certainly that is one of the most important things we can invest in right now is a new school, but we know there's going to be other capital needs. Councilor Jordan, as you've referenced, and we're well aware, deferred capital maintenance is something that gets cited by the rating agencies. They want to see us invest in ourselves. And so the most recent ratings are based on performance from fiscal 21. So it doesn't fully capture what's been happening since. So I thought it would be really important for this committee to have a good understanding of what's going on right now. Because you may hear the mayor or others talk about the $5 million ARPA municipal buildings project. What does that actually mean? So what I have on this slide in front of you, and then I have some printouts, although I actually think the slide is a little bit larger than what printed out earlier, breaks down what projects are currently underway. Some may be completed, some may be out to bid. Some have the funding source already appropriated for it. So we're talking about improving the City Hall annex, fixing the skylights, the roof, the building envelope. We're talking about air filtration. Same thing here at City Hall. Identifying all of the sources of water coming into the building, dealing with some of the long-term issues. And then also just a freshen up within the city offices as well. You can see that here. I know that the DPW building is something that is often neglected and not talked about. There is a very healthy amount of money set aside right now to address the conditions of the roof and the building envelope at DPW and address some of the concerns that have developed over the years in that building. I mean, right now, for example, one of the bays, the skylight, has essentially collapsed. If not for this ARPA funding, we certainly would be having a different conversation about how we would pay for that. But thankfully, we have that money. It's sitting here now. Some of these already have purchase orders, or they're under some level of procurement, design work, and so on. We go on to the fire department. I know that's something that has come up. Right now, every single fire station in the city is being impacted by this investment. That is anywhere from new boilers to air filtration systems to generators. Station 6, which is the station out on Homestead, which services all of West Holyoke and even some of Southampton, the ability for it to be active no matter what. So there's a new generator that's being installed there. And then same thing with the police department, new technology. The city actually just invested for the first time in, probably since that building was first opened, in new servers in the police department, as well as a new server system here at City Hall. That's all being done through this ARPA project. And what's great is this is just the first tranche. This is the money that Mayor Murphy actually had allocated that is currently being spent. That's before we even get to the second tranche, which there's the potential for future investment in these facilities as well. So I just thought it was important for folks to have a good understanding of what's currently happening, how we're currently investing in ourselves. Then we would want to start talking about what are some future capital needs. And so what's on the next slide is kind of a total and aggregate. I did provide to the committee, and we have extra copies for anybody else that needs them, what these all break down to. So the mayor has gone out and requested of all the city departments, what are the needs that you have in the next 5 to 10 years that we would normally be borrowing for? So we have, some of this is right here in this room. The city council chambers is a big chunk of that top line. And the mayor has identified ARPA as a funding source for that, as well as historic refinishing of certain floors within City Hall. You'll see under the initial project budget that we just went over, floors, carpets within City Hall, but there are certain areas where a traditional finish just isn't what the mayor's looking for, nor is it, going to live up to the historic nature of the building. So the mayor has identified and found some estimates, roughly about $100,000 for new floors at City Hall. When we get into the DPW, what we're talking about here is exactly what we'd be thinking about. We're talking about lawnmowers, we're talking about heavy equipment, we're talking about plow trucks, we're talking about refuse trucks. We just purchased some, and that's really, what's great about this is this council has authorized, over the past 5 to 7 years, a number of different spending packages. So new fire trucks, new dump trucks, new refuse trucks. Those things are coming off the line and they're being put into service now. We expect to get anywhere between 10 and 20 years of service out of these vehicles. So you don't see those numbers necessarily listed in here because we've just bought them. When we think about what the next 5 to 10 years holds, there are certainly things, the deputy chief's vehicles at the fire department need to be replaced. Some other radio equipment, dispatch equipment, some further technological upgrades that will need to happen. The library needs a little bit of a freshen up. It's, a relatively new building, but it gets probably more use than most other municipal buildings. So the carpets, the window shades, things like that. But again, we have this one-time money with ARPA that's going to allow us to invest in ourselves with many of these types of projects as we deem them eligible, or the federal government has deemed them eligible, and the mayor's authorized the spending. So when you look at this list of, and this was a list that the mayor had compiled with advice from his department heads, what we see here is roughly $1.2 million that we estimate we would want to go a more traditional funding route, meaning at some point in the next couple of years, 3-4 years, we may be coming, or the mayor may be coming to the council seeking an authorization to purchase those new refuse trucks, those new plow trucks. We're talking about anything above $250,000 for an individual purchase, we'd probably borrow for. But we also have capital stabilization listed in here. And so what's really interesting is when you look at what the needs are, and this is just funding sources that we've identified, but these projects haven't been put into action yet. We're about $3.2 million worth of additional spending. The bulk of that is coming from either capital stabilization, which of course the council would have to approve once the mayor puts an authorization in front of you, and additional ARPA funds, and then the bond. So when we talk about, well, what can we afford? I know we talked about, actually before I move on, any questions about these projects?
Sorry, go ahead.
Mayor, yeah.
I think Councilor Jordan was going to ask a question.
Councilor Jordan?
Oh, okay. So you're doing currently, just so I understand the presentation, you have 4.8 million of active capital improvement going on
Correct.
currently. And then you're saying that over the next 10 years, there's about 3.3 million more.
Yeah, and what I would also say is that those projects that the 4.8 make up right now, there's an additional authorization in front of the mayor being reviewed by the Office of Community Development for approximately another $4 million of ARPA funds to be used in these same buildings. So, you know, for example, the server project was something that we thought we might be able to push off. Certain things happened that needed to be put in right away. That was about $600,000. So that meant, okay, the roof in this building, we know we're going to do it. It's being accounted for here. We're going to use the second tranche for that. So I don't want to say that it's only going to be 4.8 based out of ARPA, but that's what we currently have authorized, and in some cases, purchase orders open.
So what I want to, just so I'm understanding the presentation, is when we're talking about capital spending for the city, what about things like improvements to the annex that would be needed over the next 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like, from everything I've been told, the numbers are bigger than some of these numbers. And things like sidewalks, road repair, parks,
Yep.
like, are we using any assumptions for all of those type of things that we might, as a community, need to do over the next 10 years?
So for roads and sidewalks, traditionally, that's Chapter 90.
So that's
funding.
100% all funded.
We would be able to use
Okay.
state grants, the way we currently have, to fund those things.
All our public road projects are all
Yeah.
planned for and funded using Chapter 90. And in some cases, if we have some sort of neighborhood improvement program and a MassWorks grant is leveraged, you can certainly use that. We can put in here, and this is not in here, our recent conversation about the private roads, assuming if
Yep.
there's consensus, we want to add that into our capital, we can
Right.
certainly kind of bake that into this. I did want to make a point, though, that borrowing is, there's at least in my mind and how I plan and manage, there's kind of a two-step process here. Borrowing is like the last resort. You evaluate all your revenue options, assess your needs, evaluate all your revenue options, and you execute using those accordingly. And while you're doing that, right, also taking what's available and building up our capital stabilization so that as things come up, again, now capital station is a source. We can just pay for it and not have to borrow. So the goal is to limit our borrowing unless like we really have to. And I think that's, Councilor Jordan, the biggest point you're trying to make is
Right.
you want to make sure that cushion is there.
Exactly,
If we
yeah.
really have to borrow and things are hitting the fan. So
Right, exactly. Okay, so great answer. Obviously, one of the things that we had to take away from a recent meeting too, which was really helpful from April, was the fact that the state is going to now, because obviously we have other schools, and the question is, over the next 10 years, is Whitney going to need to come in and ask for some additional money? I think we've already stated that the state is going to help us with, particularly the boiler project, some of the windows, the doors. So that is a great piece of new information that's super helpful. Point is, I just want the community to understand, by doing this, we're not saying, well, this is the only thing we're doing, right? We're trying to completely rebuild the community and reinvest in ourselves for the future to make Holyoke as great as we all want it, right? Okay, great. Now, I'm assuming we didn't put CSO in here because the assumption there is there'll be more either sewer increases, or we're going to have an enterprise fund to fund all of that, right?
at your next meeting, we're going to have a long conversation
Yes,
about
that's next week, yes.
sewers and CSO, and and the enterprise owns that. Currently, the city historically has been subsidizing the enterprise, and we really need to have a hard discussion about changing that practice and making it solely 100% funded by, self-sustainable. But that conversation is going to be that's a whole other rabbit hole.
Yes. All right.
And also not included on here are, like the waterworks, for example.
Yeah, and they sort of handle their thing over there, and,
Yeah.
and they do rate increases,
Exactly.
and I know they just did another rate increase. So
Same concept. Right?
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. All right, so you've taken. I mean, you're the mayor and you're the treasurer, so
Yep.
you've looked at this to say, you've done this analysis of the other capital needs. This is the number, and you feel we can do this and this, and we're good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some borrowing capacity numbers that we can go to as well. I think
Thank you.
see
You running the meeting?
No,
You
no,
have
no,
Juan
no,
wanted to
no,
run
no,
it.
no,
Now you want to run it?
No.
Councilor Reagan.
Thank you. I would like to be recognized.
Councilor Reagan.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't speak into the mic.
So I just want to follow up on the CSO question that Councilor Jourdain asked, because I'm just wondering if there might be consideration in that second tranche that bonding matters might be able to be considered in that regard, if that's even in the consideration. I was just wondering.
And this is just my perspective as I receive the information and continue to evaluate and continue to take on the city's worries. The funding we're getting via ARPA, although 20 million sounds like a lot, it barely it doesn't even scratch the surface on the CSO issue. So no
Right.
matter what we use for ARPA, the impact is so limited to no when it's the CSO is the CSO, like, and we're going to deal with that. So I guess it's like we have these limited fundings. We're going to throw pennies at the CSO problem using ARPA. And it's good.
Still the elephant in the room, though.
It's a huge elephant in the room. I do not disagree, and I think, I think that's
Okay.
we're going to work together and understand how the city can help. The enterprise, we do own it, but certainly, I think there's two issues. There's the CSO problem, the deferred maintenance, the kicking down the can down the road all these years. And then there's also the kicking can down the road on dealing with the operational deficiency of the sewer rate. So we got to deal with both of them, roll with the punches as it comes. But I want to make a point about the ARPA, though, is thankfully, as far as our capital needs, that we have this ARPA project. Because we might be having a different conversation if the ARPA didn't exist. We're looking forward to invest in total, and we'll go through the process. I want to hear the feedback from we got the Citizens Advisory, we got DGR coming up, prioritizing the capital needs of our city. I think for many years we've invested a lot in community and deferred maintenance and really put our needs last. I think that this is an opportunity here to make this infusion investment to catch up in this deferred maintenance. So that it gives us that startup capacity we need to hit the ground running on this other project we're trying to work on, which is also part of the deferred situation that we're talking about here. So we're lucky to have this resource right now in our time.
Yeah, and for any person in this room, any person that works at City Hall, any person that has to travel to City Hall, one thing that we're very excited about with this next tranche is being able to address the old police station and parking deck out back. So it rained for 10 minutes today, and I had to walk about 8 inches worth of water just to get to my car. So
And let's not forget the city-owned municipal gas station too.
Yep.
We're going to be investing in that as well. So those are huge capital expenses that we're responsible for.
Yep.
And then the IT infrastructure, and you mentioned the servers. We're finally going to upgrade our Munis system and maximize on our use of that $600,000 investment from the first tranche. The ARPA, lucky to have it.
Yeah.
But a little over $1 million to upgrade our IT infrastructure and technology infrastructure that I had referenced that was from the 90s. So we're just lucky to have this resource to do that. Otherwise, we'd be on the hook and making bond requests to pay for those things, you're right.
Thank you.
Just a quick update before we go on the discussion with the wastewater treatment plant deficiencies, the CSO issues, and a lot of things that are connected to the enterprise fund. That meeting was scheduled for next Wednesday, and I used both this Wednesday and next Wednesday for these purposes. There's a little glitch. Mark Abrams has got a conflict with that, a personal conflict of being here next Wednesday. I haven't had a chance to talk to everybody, including the chair of the ordinance, but I'm trying to negotiate the rescheduling to June 7th. And I think that's important as we go forward tonight, that everybody understands that. It's a number of different, you're aware, Mayor, but I received from the chair of the BPW that issue, and we're working on it.
Mr. Chairman, since we're on this subject, as you plan for your June 7th meeting, and same thing with the discussions regarding the private roads, like, we need the city's overseers to come together and really understand this stuff. So if you can encourage your colleagues to be present at your June 7th meeting and come and pay attention, ask the questions and understand, because it's whatever we do, the CSO situation is not a political one. It's a reality we're dealing with. Federal government's putting this on for good reasons. It's an environmental issue, and it's been happening, I think, longer than any of us have been here. I mean, I know Jourdain and McGivern have been fighting this battle. I don't know when this came in front of you, 30 years ago?
Joe may predate the Connecticut River. When
the consent decree and these orders first came about, so it's been around for a long time. It's not, none of us created this problem, except for maybe not being as proactive as we should.
And with
in the past.
fairness to the founders of the city of Holyoke and any community that is
there were no laws
50 years or
around this,
older, it's not something that could have been visioned as to the right way to do it.
That's right.
And there are communities like Worcester where their entire projects were paid for by the federal government. And I sometimes think we need to keep reminding our federal and state representatives that, we need some help.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, sorry.
Councilor Bacon?
If I may interject, just through you to the mayor. This is set up as a joint meeting with ordinance and finance. I had filed the order out of the goal of having at least a majority of the city council in for the discussion because it sounded pretty complex. So that's the hope, right, Mr.
I had
Chairman?
a procedural question too on that. Do I get 2 votes since I'm the, I sit on both?
You get 1 vote and 1 vote.
Okay.
2 for 1.
Oh, well, I tried.
No, the committee joint is it's not like the joint. Yeah.
We have a law department look into that?
It's like when we do a joint meeting with the planning board. You have 2 bodies meeting together, but you vote separately because we have our own agendas. But what we'll be talking about will lead into what the ordinance committee purview is, and certainly we want. I agree with Councilor Bacon. It's a good proposal to do it together. But it looks like June 7th, and I'll talk to everybody before tonight's over. And thank Councilor Jourdain for bringing it up, because Whitney's been in here enough times for. And I'm not the oldest person on the city council. I know
No.
I'm just the longest serving one.
Exactly.
There are others that are older who I won't met. No, Peter's younger. Whitney's been with us enough times, and I think many of us know.
And he's younger than Joe McGivern. I'm going to guess.
Inventory of school buildings. There are buildings that are going to need work, and I think we all know that. We're not hiding that. But I have to also give credit to Whitney, to Councilor Raymond Fair, who suggested years ago that we turn the buildings over to the schools so that the principals would be responsible for their buildings and their budgets. And that has changed a lot of things, And the principals, Whitney and the administration have done a great job of, think about Holyoke High. There's communities around us that have built 2 new high schools while we have a high school that's
Can we give them the parks?
top notch.
Can we give them the parks to maintain too? We'll talk.
Well, he's got the strings on Roberts Field, and A little bit of Mackenzie. Anyways. Marty?
Yeah. As has been mentioned, you know, Whitney can speak more to the accelerated repair projects, but at this point, just about every school in the city has either or is in line for a refresh of some sort. We're talking about boilers, roofs, windows, the building envelope, and that is all at very close, if not at an 80% reimbursement, unlike other types of projects. Now, one thing that the committee had asked for, and it's part of the packet that was handed out, speaks specifically to the use of ESSER funds to make up the city share. That's provided here. Now, when we talk about some of these other needs that we've identified, where we wouldn't be using ARPA, we wouldn't be using capital stabilization, we may need to borrow. I know at the last meeting, if you want to go to the next slide, we talked about what the affordability model would be, building in some assumptions. And so we see, just to remind everybody, the yellow is the existing debt service that is trending down because we haven't taken on any new debt. The red is once the school project would come online in fiscal 27, and the blue, the bold blue line at the top, is a recommended debt ceiling, and that is based on the 5-year financial forecast and essentially sets us at about $5.5 million, which is more than we're paying now, of course, but that's what we think we could afford based on all the information that we have. So one of the questions that came up at the last meeting was, well, what does that blue line actually represent? And so if we go to the next slide, and in folks' presentation, I came up with this slide to talk about what the actual borrowing capacity is. Now, I didn't focus on the full 30 years of the project because right now where we're at, we're not paying for the new school. If it's authorized and once it's opened and built, the first payments would be in fiscal 27, and then we start to see a pretty sharp decline in the existing debt service. So what does our borrowing capacity look like over the next 10 fiscal years or so from where we're at now moving forward? And what we can see is this number at the top represents in straight dollars exactly what ability we would have between the existing debt service, assuming we take on the new school, and that debt ceiling. So obviously in fiscal 27, that's the first year, we're still paying off a lot of the old debt. You can see that equals about $200,000, $199,121. Now, just to put that in perspective, the $1.2 million that I had shown on the previous slide, if we actually wanted to round that up for escalation purposes, and just let's call it $1.5 million. If we were to build in the same assumptions.
Could you go, Rory, just through how you got to 1.5, just for people that
are absolutely,
and for the committee members, refresh our memory.
Yep. So what I meant for the 1.5 is when we look at the equipment that both the police and DPW would need to be paying for, new vehicles essentially, is what we're talking about, and some pretty high-end technological upgrades that wouldn't be ARPA eligible with the police department. That's about 1.29, let's say 1.3. We don't borrow for a couple of years, those prices are going to go up. 1.5 is that number. And this is just to illustrate what we can afford, because that's what we're all here to talk about. So using the same conservative assumptions that we did for the school costs and the school debt costs, which were affirmed at the previous meeting by Senator McInerney from Hilltop, essentially a 5.5% interest rate, which is far greater than what we're paying now. And even when we're looking at other debt, 5.5 is a pretty big number. 20 years, because we're talking about vehicles. You can't borrow for 30 years for a vehicle. You can only borrow between 15 and 20 years. We'd be looking at a fixed cost of $125,000. So that would, to borrow 1.5 million over 20 years at 5.5% interest, we'd be looking at an increase of 125,000, which you can see from this graphic here. We could absorb in addition to the new school debt and paying our existing debt service. The 1 year where it would be tight, and it would be tight, would be in that first year of fiscal '27. But if we're looking ahead and we're planning ahead, we would know not to build debt on top of the existing debt or the school debt that we couldn't afford. But even with that, what we've identified so far, we could afford it using this model. And then you can see as this goes on, the debt fluctuates a little bit because certain debt's falling off, certain debt's coming up. And so that's why we see those fluctuations. But by the time we get to fiscal 33, we see a very steep and steady decline. And if I were, and I'd be happy to show this to the committee if they wanted to see it, but if you just look at our existing debt service, which had been previously provided to the council, it really starts dropping off in fiscal 34. A very steep decline in that, which would then allow us to either realize that cost savings in the city budget. We wouldn't need to budget for this. Or we would be able to borrow, maybe by that point we need a new pumper truck. Maybe we need a new aerial truck for the fire department. Maybe we've built up our reserves enough to not have to borrow for that.
That's the goal.
That is the goal. That's a goal I think we all share. Mm-hmm. So this is our capacity to borrow additional debt and how we would afford it. Obviously, we're not going to budget for things we don't have to pay for. So this is just illustrative. This year, the budget is about 4.6 million for long-term debt service, and that's for both the school and city projects that we're currently paying for. But that number that we used is one that, people far smarter than me, looking at the financial forecast had put in and what we were basing our assumptions on.
Rory, just 2032, can you explain the drop?
In 2032,
never mind the drop.
why it goes up?
What's the increase?
Goes, well, up, but,
I can absolutely.
Availability goes down very.
So that is, if you remember when we talk about some of the offsets, and that's actually what I was going to go to next. Some of the offsets that we've identified will last for the entire term of the bond, namely the $500,000 that DESI has authorized. A letter from Commissioner Riley is included in both the presentation and this packet. The first 5 years, we plan on using approximately $800,000 annually for those first 5 years to help reduce the costs of the bond payment. Well, not reduce the cost of the bond payment, reduce the impact to the city's general operating budget, because we would take that. Now, once year 5 of that goes away, you do see a slight uptick, but then it's a pretty steep drop right down again. So that is what that little anomaly, let's call it, represents. And so I know that at the last meeting, one of the questions the counselors had was they wanted to make sure that the number from DESI was actually something that we had a signed agreement saying that we can do this. And so this is a letter. It's in here. There's also a copy printed out separately for everybody that Commissioner Riley sent to both the mayor and Superintendent Soto back in January, approving this. And I don't know if Anthony, if you want to speak on this at all, just again to remind folks exactly how we would make this work.
Yeah, no, I think this is, this is the documentation that I think we were here in December, you had asked for, so we had followed up with the commissioner and he provided it.
Chair, just on record that we received the letter and keep it in our archives.
Yep.
And we'll get I'm sure the full city council's got a copy, but we'll make sure.
Great.
Yep. All those in favor? Any opposed? So
Sorry. And then the last item that we talked a little bit about, and this really comes in terms of an update from the mayor, are some of the negotiations that he and other city officials have been taking on in terms of pilot agreements and some of the positive results. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, Mayor.
And before diving into everything that Rory just shared, these graphs, these numbers, these are all assumptions based on conservative estimates. It can potentially be much more favorable than what we're looking at. And then also the other strategy here, the $500,000 I think is in that assumption, right, in your graphs, and nothing else. And so I've been trying to figure out, and also the marijuana, trying to figure out other ways that we can potentially bring that annual contribution as much less as possible from our normal appropriation. And so without sharing too much of what's going on, because everything is, we're all in the middle of negotiating these, but I'm happy to say that these conversations I've been having with our existing pilot payment organizations have been positive. We've approached every conversation with a clear strategic plan, objective in mind, that we're not just raising it just because. Part of what we report to them is our effort to get this middle school built and trying to reduce the impact to taxpayers as much as possible, which again the conversations have been very positively received. And so the idea is to take whatever increase that I can get from these pilot arrangements, commit those increases specifically toward the debt payment. So that way, again, reducing the impact and not having to raise and appropriate through taxation resident and commercial taxes toward the actual debt payment. So the team thought it'd be a good idea I share that update. Certainly those conversations continue, but just to share here publicly with you all that every conversation I've had with those organizations, there hasn't been resistance. It's been very positively received. And I'm very much looking forward to see what the conclusion is going to be, and I'll share that update with you as soon as there is some sort of conclusion. But just so you're aware that those increases, whatever the difference might be, I'm very, very much looking forward to commit that. An important note here, also, which is in front of you in the budget, this is all based on today's mayor. All these strategies and plans and commitments. Who knows what your next mayor might want to do, and every reason why I think that CAFO position is extremely important. The CAFO position keeps the plans and the strategies on course, and making sure that we're keeping with our city obligations, reducing harm, limiting liability, and financially planning for the future and taking care of that. So, cross administrations. So I thought I'd just kind of mention that important plug, so that we don't go backwards.
Right.
Thank you. Under discussion. Councilor Tomlin.
Yeah, I want to thank our treasurer very much for giving us the projections, the 5 to 10 years. I think that's something very important, that we now need to look to the future and how we're going to pay things down the road, because, you hear a lot of people, is something going to happen down the road? We're going to increase our taxes. And the mayor, you talked about trying to keep things, less borrowing as best possible that we can do and using other funds. That's important this is a long-term project. It's 30 years, and we got to make sure that we're on point with this. And I'm happy to hear, Mayor, that you're talking about negotiations with the pilot, positive reaction, because, every little bit helps, and we got to focus on that. Even the smallest change and increase of utilizing dollars that we don't have right now to help fund this, and especially the schools with that $500,000, $500,000 every year. I think that is vital too, to help with moving this forward, because this is it's the future of our city. How this new school can impact, what we're going to bring to our city in the future. It's not just about building a brand new school. It's about the future of Holyoke and the future of our education and the future of people coming to move to Holyoke to see what we have here and to see that we have a first-rate school, and that's important that we can do that and we can afford it, down the road. And who knows who's going to be here in 10 years? Who knows who's going to be serving on a school committee, the council, or the mayor? Whoever it is, hopefully will be moving this forward. And I applaud you, Mayor, by bringing that new position forward, because I think that's important, that we stay on point, and that we have somebody that's going to look at this down the road and the finances, that we can say this is something that we promised, back in 2023 that we're going to take care of, and it's something that the future elected officials can say we're going to continue what their desire is to have in this new school in our city. So I really appreciate, all the hard work, and especially the school building committee that really put a lot of time and effort in putting this this really new school, this state of the art, not just about a building, it's about the students. So really thank everybody involved with this.
Councilor Plowell? Excuse me. Councilor Plowell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. My first one's for Rory. Rory, I want to thank you for the presentation. So I understand the slides. I understand the borrowing capacity, the debt service. Can you just clarify? So the number, what's the total debt ceiling in the hundreds of millions of dollars? What's that total number? And what is it now? And then what's that supposed to go up to? I understand the debt service, but I'm looking at the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I would say that this is a question that's been asked before, and when you look at what the city, I'm not saying what we could afford. There's a difference, right, between what we can afford and what we could borrow for.
Right.
And that's what this exercise is really about. So, Counselor, it's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up, because we can borrow hundreds of millions of dollars. We can't afford the payments for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of debt. Right. So the state gives us, there's different criteria, but when we're talking about it, we don't really get into that. It's a little bit different than some of the debates that are happening now outside of municipal government as it relates to this, right? But hundreds of millions of dollars we have the ability to borrow. We can't afford that. What we can afford is how it fits within the budget. And so that $5.5 million recommended debt ceiling is based on what we can actually afford through raising and appropriating a tax levy, right? And so what that represents, right now this $4.6 million represents close to $40+ million worth of projects that we've either paid for we're paying for them, are either completed or underway. They may have been completed 30 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, there's some schedules where we're still paying down, projects that related to the dam, right? Buying the dam back. Now, there's also refunding that happens along the way. So just like you're able to refinance your car loan or your home loan, we're able to bundle this all together, and every 10 years or so, we're able to go to the market and refinance and get a better rate. So the number that's in front of the council right now and that we've been using on as far as our assumptions is based entirely on what we can afford to pay. And so we can afford to pay for this. We don't need to go to the voters for a debt exclusion or an override. We don't need to ask for the ability to tax people more. Within our current taxation structure and budget, we're able to afford these payments. Does that answer your question?
I mean, a little bit. I guess I'm just trying to find out, so that blue line, that $6 million blue line, I think that was the debt service line. So what does that line represent? So I understand that's the debt service line, but what does that represent in terms of the whole thing?
So, well, now...
So what's the dollar amount before an override? Like, how much can we have before we have to ask for an override in the hundreds of millions?
The override is dollar amount more than what we can tax, right? The tax
Exactly.
levy.
Yeah, I mean, so
it's
without getting too far down the rabbit hole of overrides and debt exclusion, very simply, what would trigger something like that is if the mayor was proposing a budget that needed to raise more than we are allowed to raise under Prop 2.5, he would have to go to the voters and ask for an override, right? That's something that's not on the table and it's nowhere being discussed. We're nowhere close to that.
Right.
But that's what would trigger an override related specifically to that. There's another type of override, which is a debt exclusion, which is what some communities do when they're taking on large-scale projects. Smaller towns may do a debt exclusion for the new refuse truck because they can't afford it within their town budget. So they go to the town folk, and the same way that we may go to the residents of the city and say, we need to pay for this extremely large project, and we need to raise additional funds to pay for this. That's not what this is, and in fact, we've been very clear with both bond counsel, because this is a question that came up from bond counsel. It was probably one of the shortest emails I've ever read back from the mayor to their question, which was simply no debt exclusion, because that was the question. Is the city entertaining? No. So we would have needed to have already thought about that if that was the case for this project, and it isn't. Now, as far as the hundreds of millions, that's what I was talking about. What we would maybe be able to borrow for is in the hundreds of millions. But both the way the process is the mayor would come to the council requesting that authorization to borrow, and the council would have to approve it. And these same conversations would take place. So there's many checks and balances that would prevent us from ever getting to that point. Yeah.
For the councilor, the 6 million, or the
It's 5.5.
$5.5 million. That is what? The annual payments?
Correct.
Okay. So that line represents the what we set as the maximum payment we can pay within our current funding structure. So that's what that number is. If we were to go out to, and municipal finance, and we talk about this all the time, is complex. It's not black and white. It's complicated, and we should always try to find ways to explain it the best we can. But there's the levy ceiling and the levy limit. We can budget up to what's called the levy limit. Anything above that, that's the Prop 2.5, where you have to go out and ask the voters to spend above that. But if Tanya, if you don't mind, if there's anything else you can add to help the councilor understand what these numbers represent and how this works, that'd be helpful. Not to put you on the spot,
But you're going to.
I'm going
so.
to.
I think what the mayor is trying to say is that the city with the new school, within the budget that we have now and the revenues that we're expecting on receiving in the future, that we should be able to, with obviously the help of the schools, make the payments of the $1.5 million. I'm not sure how much I can add to that because of course I can't see in the future, but also we have to think about what might happen if we don't consider having a new school. And if we all work super hard together, we build our revenues. When we build a strong community, we'll bring in more revenues, and that, you know, will help all of us.
Thanks, Tanya, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think I do get that part. I think I see, like, from the graphs, it looks like we can afford it. I guess I think the mayor was kind of following my question a little bit. I guess I'll just try one last. So I guess I'm just looking for the total number of, so how much money do we currently owe, and what does the school bring us to total outside, not looking at the 6 million, the 5.5, looking at total, the entire thing. And then what line, that blue line that represents before, I understand we don't need an override for this, that's beautiful. So what's that number, like the total number?
How much debt we currently have, Rory?
We currently have?
That we pay right now annually in our budget.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, I can pull that if you want to give me a minute. I can pull that up. It's north of 40 million.
In total, but
yeah.
What are we paying? What are we baking into our budget?
Well, right now, so this current fiscal year's budget, which is in front of the council for review, has roughly $4.6 million.
And we're talking
for debt service.
And the schools will bring it up another, what, annually? The $2.5 million we said, the debt payments.
Yep. Just give me 1 sec. I do have this information.
Can you go through and break down
the
payment on this and the allocations?
So there are current debt payments that we make.
Actually, Mayor, if you could, I don't know if it's possible for Aaron to pull back up the slide presentation, because some of this information, I believe, is in there, as I'm also pulling it up here, just so.
So I was going to say is about 4.6 billion, and every year debt rolls off.
Yeah.
Depending on when,
I'm talking just the school piece too.
Yeah,
Yep.
And so you got the 2.5 million that would add to that, and then if you look at the chart.
So
the chart, that's the new middle school debt affordability model that we put together here, is all our debt plus the schools. And that's how, what he tried to show here, which I think was pretty, when he first showed this to me, I was like, why didn't you give this to me a long time ago? You can see like how the debt rolls off, how it spikes up because the $800,000 a year goes away and then goes back down, and then, but Councilor Buello, the annual debt payments, about 4.5 million plus another 2.5 we're expecting for the schools. And if you look at the graph, the reason why it goes down is because debt rolls off depending on its schedule.
Yep.
Throughout the years.
Yep. And just to put it in hard numbers, it's going to be for the first 5 years with the offsets that we've already discussed, it would add 1.4 million. I'll just use round numbers.
And that's not
That's all
including
right.
the potential with the pilot payment.
That's just what we know right now. For the first 5 years, it would add 1.4 million.
So it was the 500,000 from the school?
So
500, yep.
And then
Yep.
And if we look at the school line, I'm sorry to cut you off. So I understand everything we're saying. I'm just trying to, the top of that red line right there, what does that number represent is what I'm asking.
So the highest payment that we would have is in fiscal 27, and with our existing debt service and the school debt, it would come to $5.3 million. That's the maximum that we have
What's the
projected.
total city debt for that number, like in the hundreds of millions of dollars? So I understand that's the annual. How much money does the city owe at that point, at that top of the red line right there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It would
No,
be-
I know, I'm trying.
The totality of it.
It's going to be 40, 40
yeah.
plus the 86 for the school, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So it'll be 126.
Oh, mind
Right,
you.
so yeah.
Even though the state's paying, technically we take it on and they
So it'll be
cover
about 80 million
the payment,
total,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
So,
so that makes sense. Okay, so I think that's the number I was trying to find. So 126, and then what number does the blue line represent? So what does the blue line represent? So the red is for sure 126 million?
Oh, wait,
So,
hold on.
can I take a stab at this?
Yes.
Not answering his question, but just rephrasing it. So that red line going out represents what, $2.2 million? Is that right? And that $2.2 million is the $40 million, which is the city's share. So if we go all the way up to the 6,
Yep.
I would think it's going to be like 40 plus another 40 plus maybe another 30. So 40 and 70. What's that? I think that would get us to that
40 and
blue
70,
line.
110. So our existing debt service,
Rough-
our total
roughly.
existing debt service right now, assuming we take on no other debt, these are the hard payments, and I think this is where I was getting tripped up between what the actual value of the projects are versus what we're paying. I apologize. $41,383,249.08. That is our total existing debt service. That is what we owe right now, assuming we never take on any other debt. That's what we have to pay. What we're talking about is another $40 million in school debt related to this project. Realizing the number in front of you is larger than that, but we've gone through that reimbursement mechanism. So we'd be talking about, assuming no other debt, we'd be talking about 82 million, 81 million. And so that is what the red line represents. That is taking into account what we know we have to pay for and what the future debt payment would be related to the school. What the blue line and what's on the borrowing capacity slide speaks specifically to the difference between that red line and the blue line, what we can afford in the city's budget with that $5.5 million ceiling. So anywhere from a couple $100,000 all the way to close to $2 million once we get to fiscal 34.
All right, thanks a lot, everybody. I appreciate you. My last question is just for the mayor. I just wanted to clarify. So if we have 100% of the pilot, so the part that's being negotiated is if we go to 100% and it goes up to 115, that 15% is what's being applied to the bond?
When we go to 100%, what do you mean?
Like, so you're negotiating an increase to the pilot, right?
Right.
So is it, if our pilot is at 100% and then you negotiate, let's say a 10% increase, that 10% is what's being added?
Yeah, so anything above what they've been currently paying, because the current pilot payments, we bake that into our current budget. So anything above that they pay, we've never depended on before. And I think actually our auditor does it conservatively. So whatever they're paying now, we budget a little less of what they're already paying us. But the idea is, if it went up 10%, right? Well, I want to take that 10% increase that we've never been dependent on before for anything and commit it to the debt payments. It's just kind of a strategy.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Counselor.
Counselor Jordan.
Okay, thank you. First of all, great job. I really appreciate the great follow-up. I have a number of thoughts, but I'll share if we're going to take a final action tonight. I don't know. Is that the intent, maybe?
I hope so.
Okay, good. I think we're ready to take final action. In terms of the payment, obviously we have some big things on the horizon too. And one of the things is it was the debt service question, and then it was the cash flow question, which is revolving around as you know, the retirement board has set a very aggressive schedule over the next 10 years.
Thinking about that. And it's a good aggressive schedule.
Yeah, but you're not so sure about that.
No. So you mean like
well, what I'm
changing course or?
Well, as you know, they want to fully fund
Right.
the unfunded liability, which is approximately plus or minus $146 million over the next 10 years. Right. So what I want to see in your estimates here is, are you accounting for this going up $300,000 every year for the next 10 years? Because that is a dramatic increase. And one would say, okay, well, gee, we get through 2033. That's great. You know, we solve the theoretically fully funding of the retirement program. But then we have the question of OPEB, which is twice the size of the actual unfunded pension liability. It's estimated, I saw in the recent reporting, it was $310 million. So we haven't funded anything on that. So the question is, now we're talking here committing to a $30 million bond, and I have formed an opinion on that shortly, and we'll talk about that. But, you know, I'm looking at it as you guys are looking at this. You're running the ship at the moment. Auditor also sits on the retirement board. You've looked at all of this. You feel we can do this. Like, we can take on this $1.5 million payment, or your 1.4, of course, which does go up, by the way, in 5 years to 2.2 million a year, right? Because we're going to lose the 800,000. So, you know, this is going up 300 grand a year. Tax revenue levy, you know, how much is that really realistically going to keep going up year after year? And what I want to make sure is 5 years from now, we don't say, this is up, $1.5 million more per year, this 800,000 hit, and then our future selves in 5 years say, oh my God, you know, we need a tax override, right? And that's the kind of, if you recall, one of my takeaways from the last meeting was I was looking for assurances from you that this isn't going to be because I want us to transmit to the public that this isn't a backdoor override, that we're setting ourselves up in 5 years. So you want to just touch on that a little bit, and you feel comfortable having looked at this, the auditor, she is going to weigh in and feel comfortable on this?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points to make, and then a general one. As far as the retirement schedule is concerned, and this, whoever was involved at that time that put that together, you should really give yourselves a pat on the back, and that aggressive schedule was formed and that you actually stayed committed to it. And so ideally, and you know, again, I think about these things and figure out how to plan for and pivot and strategize. I do have in front of you, and Tanya, you can mark me if I'm wrong, did the agenda item the order get introduced to the council about creating the OPEB stabilization yet, or are we still trying to get the appropriate language for that?
I believe that the law department is working on that currently because we never accepted the OPEB statute.
Right.
So whatever.
I have an order actually asking us to accept that statute. So
yeah, that order actually.
Thank you, Tanya. Yeah.
Yeah. Came right before I told you that this is something we should definitely do. Absolutely. Yeah. So soon that we'll establish this OPEB stabilization. We'll put whatever dollar amount in there just to start it.
Exactly.
Ideally, when this retirement account becomes full, we want to redirect those payments to start building up that OPEB because we were already in it. We're used to it.
Right.
And then think about what else at that time, and who knows what our the health of our community is going to be at that time. We might have built more.
Let's hope.
More, bring in more tax revenue and grow our budget, which I think goes to the general point here. Like, we can do nothing and deal with the costs, and the PEC is going to require us to do, or whatever the case might be. But generally, like this investment that we're trying to do with this middle school it's strategic in our end, and
You
the
don't
desire
have to
that,
sell me on that point.
Yeah,
Mayor.
yeah.
I'm with you. I'm totally locked in with you. What I'm saying is,
What I'm saying is,
we're looking at the cash flows over the next,
But that's the thing. I think all of that impacts it all impacts the dynamics of all of it.
Mhm.
So the budget is consistently shifting. It's a moving target, and we do what we can to meet our obligations. And we look at our new growth estimates. We identify our revenue sources, and we continue to pivot, make investments, fund services, and all of that. And
Right.
so, and now that we have also the financing forecast model that's evolving as more information is being shared, and we learn more about what our positions are, so that we can better forecast out with those assumptions and look at what not. So that way we can pivot now and make the changes now before whatever the model tells us where it's going to conflict or hit the fan. But either way, at the same time, we have to be aggressive in expanding our tax base, and part of that includes making sure we have this investment done. So it's all interconnected and related, and while we forecast out and make these investments at the same time, trying to make and looking at, I think another thing that we're hoping that we come to a conclusion soon, which you've been helpful with, is the insurance and pivoting there and potentially saving the city another $1 million.
Right.
It requires all of our efforts in each of those buckets if we're going to really balance the ship here, right?
Exactly.
So it's not
Exactly.
It's not focusing solely on this, where then this gets impacted and potentially, you know what I mean? So we're
multidimensional.
looking at all of it. I'm not painting a perfect picture. What I'm explaining is just smart budgeting, smart government, just constantly planning for getting closer to our targets without bringing any major impact or liability to the city, which you're concerned about.
Right.
And I share that concern. And the other interesting thing about government is we can plan and strategize. There's always some weird surprise that comes
That's
up.
right.
So, we just got to...
It's the old Mike Tyson statement,
Hey,
right? Everybody's got a plan
to
until you're punched in the face, you know?
Soto says that quote at the...
He likes that one, yeah. That's a good one. That's one of my favorites.
Did you hear that at graduation? Your daughter? I'm not dismissing or, I do think about those. And in my mind, I do have some plans that we're looking to propose, and one is coming, to continue our investments in those areas and keep up with our obligations while also taking care of needs in our community. So, it's we're gonna have to keep keeping our eye on that, keep working together, and keep. I pump the brakes on a lot of things to slow things down so that we have moderate increases, so that there's not major impacts in taxation when we do. Coming into this fiscal year, right, we increased taxes at 1.7% when everywhere else 3, 4, 5%. So, we're trying to slow it down, loosen up the capacity that we have in surpluses, so that we can pivot where we need to, and it's all conservative. Considering that later, as we understand what our revenue estimates position actually are, it should be much more than what we're anticipating, and just continuing that exercise in practice so that we continue to make that flexibility so that we can respond to these needs as they appear.
Let me ask you, and hopefully this is a softball question, but do you agree with me that if we make this commitment tonight, this requires us to be fiscally disciplined? And as much as our commitment is to the children, we have to be committed to this obligation that we're making here tonight, that we have an entire city to run, and it's going to require a lot of fiscal discipline on our part to make sure we keep that, as to use your analogy, the keel straight for the city. We have a lot of important things to handle. This school is super important to the city. And we're going to have to make sure that to meet all these obligations, we're going to have to maybe say no to some other things, right? Yeah.
Mayor, before you answer, just please think of this. It's time to land the plane.
I would say fiscal discipline coupled with just smart budgeting and planning.
Right.
And at least the year and 6-7 months I've been here, we've said no to a lot of things. In fact, in the budget in front of you, we said no to a lot of things, not because I don't want to or don't feel like it. There's a plan and strategy behind it, and why we're pacing ourselves and how we,
Right.
We can't swallow the apple, but we can nibble at it accordingly. And as long as we continue to stick to the plan, stick to the strategy, and be disciplined at the same time, you can weather these events. I mean, it's just like your household, right? Like,
That's right.
you want to repair, you want to change your roof and replace that kitchen and the bathroom, and you got stuff in the yard and potentially build a pool, but no one has $100,000 in their account to just do it like that. So you got to look at your revenues, understand when it's right to move. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm trying to introduce. But again, the CAFO position will do a heck of a better job than me. And every reason why I'm proposing this. So
Okay.
I'm with you.
No more questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Yep.
Councilor Reagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a couple of comments, and I can see pretty much where we're going with this tonight. So the one thing that I want to say first is that I really appreciate the approach that's being taken to lay these numbers out before us. And I see from looking at these that based on the assumptions that are made, it totally works. What I wish was that we had had our meeting relative to the enterprise fund before tonight. Because like I said, it's the elephant in the room, and it's not going to be a separate thing for the citizens. They're going to have to bear this and that. So I just wish we could have had like everything together, but the world isn't a perfect place, and I get that. So, the only other point I would make, because it looks like this is probably going to come over to the council from tonight, would be just that whatever vote is taken, that you just make sure we get the answer back and that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed before we move forward on the funding. Okay? Thank you.
Any further discussion?
I'd like to wrap
Councilor Jordan.
Yeah. So I think we're at a good place. Had an opportunity to ask questions, and obviously there's been lots of meetings, lots of discussion, lots of homework that goes into obviously a monumental size vote like this. And I would be remiss if I don't reflect back on what transpired over the last 4 years. This isn't, and it's obviously went on for longer than that. And I just want to say a number of things. One is, this is a culmination of a community conversation about the schools. One thing that was a takeaway was about approach, about cost in 2019 at the override. But I think one thing that I thought we, as Holyoakers, had unifying was that we all wanted to do something for children, for the children, and for the future of this city. Obviously, myself, I have a personal vested interest as a father of 3 in the Holyoke Public Schools, myself, obviously. But as we think about how we could get to this vote, I really appreciate the collaborative approach. I think the mayor, Aaron, the treasurer, the entire building committee, Anthony, Whitney, everybody involved, and I'm certain I'm forgetting people, really went out of their way to look and reflect back on the process from 4 years ago and said, you know what, we're willing to take a different approach and bring more people, more voices to the table, okay? I think that was really smart. The inclusivity of the committee, bringing in some new members, some of them very vocal opposition to 4 years ago, right? That got us, in my opinion, and I know it was the slogan, so I have to say it from 4 years ago, is there a better way? Okay, I really feel we ended up in a better way. We ended up with a better product at the end. In my opinion, the homework of all of this got us to a point where we got to one middle school. not 2 middle schools, that alone is a savings of $80 million, right? So that kudos to everybody that the school department worked through a number of restructuring in different ways to get us to one building. That's a huge accomplishment, and that should not go unnoticed. That is a tremendous savings of tens of millions of dollars to the people of Holyoke. That came out of this process. The model school program came out of this. We weren't going to do that the first time. That came out of this. Everyone should be complimented in doing that and getting us to that. That saved a lot of money. The takeaway about getting the commitment, not just for the $500,000, but the $2 million in repairs that we're going to get for doing the boilers and the windows and the doors for the other schools that need these really important improvements. We talked about a number of things here about the G&E and different things, but one of the things that I thought we looked at was a holistic approach. I thought the approach from management to bring everybody together to try and come to a common solution here that everybody felt comfortable with as a community, because this is all of us in this together to make this type of investment for our future that we want to, because this school is going to be a game changer for the city. It's going to be really, really great for our marketing, for our image, for our long-term objectives that we want to really be as a community. That to me is super. So what we're investing in is super important to our long-term future. But all things, no matter how wonderful, they have to be affordable, right? They have to be something that we can do. And I think you have given certainly me, and you know how skeptical I am and can be when it comes to the pennies, to make sure that we're doing this the right way. And I feel comfortable with these assurances that we are not doing this in a tax override. We not only did we save $80 million, we also saved a massive tax increase on the residents of the city by doing it with this approach. The thing that I tell my colleagues and the mayor and the treasurer and the other elected officials, and certainly the receiver, who's our appointed official from the state, is this is going to require fiscal discipline on us. This is something that we're committing to this evening, that this is something that, those numbers that Rory pointed out, these ceilings and these things about affordability, that's choices, right? So we're making a choice tonight to do this, but that may mean 5 years from now, we have other choices and we're going to have to say no to some things, because in 2023, we committed to this school project. And I just hope that this city is in its leadership, more than anything, the leadership is committing behind this really important, great project for our future. I think we've taken a holistic approach this time also to look at our total capital needs, and that was discussed in that follow-up tonight, so that we're not having blind spots, that we're not addressing the other needs, and we've been transparent about how we're going to fund those. So I really think this is unifying. This got us to a great place. It comes to a great result, and it shows to the public it's something we can afford. I think the citizens, once again, were fortuitous. Once again, they said in 2019, go back to the drawing board, do this a better way. I think we did that. I think we met that mandate tonight. I think and in the weeks previous to that, we got to a good place so that I certainly feel comfortable to vote yes for this. I'm happy to make the motion to support it. And I think this is going to be great for the community. I thank you for your hard work. And I hope my other colleagues also take the mayor. I know at your comments that you made before the whole council back on the 16th, you hope everybody embraces this. I hope they do too. And I appreciate you extending that olive branch. I certainly have grabbed it. I thank you for allowing me to push and to prod on all these different points. And I feel really comfortable to vote for this, and I'm excited for the future of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. And we got to land the plane. I'm going to land the plane, Mayor. You know?
I was just gonna say,
They already
Can you-
landed.
can you ask Anthony for another $1 million toward the school projects that you, of ESSER funds toward the window?
We haven't got him in the budget hearing yet, you know, so calm down.
I'm noticing when Councilor Jordan asks for it, he delivers.
I just want
Thank you,
to
Counselor.
share a couple quick comments. This is government at its best. You know, Mayor Garcia, for your leadership, we thank you. Aaron Brunell for running the school building committee, and I've served on a number of building committees over the years, and you run a great committee, and you have a great committee. I see a number of members here, a number of members online. I watch many of the meetings myself. We thank Councilor Tallman for representing us. I can't tell you the countless conversations I've had with Peter about this and questions I've asked that he then asked to the committee. It works. But government together collectively, our treasurer, Rory, does a fantastic job of explaining it. I mean, we often go to Cinder to get those answers, and you, with Cinder's help, I'm sure, you know, have given us many answers, including this evening, and brought the information to us. Anthony, you're our superintendent, all right? Don't let that school committee say anything different. You know, the receivership is done, but we're going to audit the budget before we take it back, all right? I'm not laughing at that one. Margaret, project manager, you're one of the best, you know, and I know there's one comment I'm not going to make this evening, but you know what I'm going to say. And Whitney, there's no better person for school building facilities and management than Whitney Anderson. And we thank you for the hard work you do. We don't give her enough credit, but that little sheriff over there in the corner, I won't tell you until tonight what she's been saying to me, but you know, somehow we made it over the hump and we got there. And Tanya in the background has been on top of a lot of things. I know Rory and the mayor understand what I'm saying, and making sure that we got to this point. It's an incredible good feeling to see good hard work of everybody, and our small but very significant vote, you know, to say yes, we can now go forward. And Kevin said a lot of good things, and I just say it's time to land the plane.
Make a motion?
Please.
I'll make a motion that the city appropriate the amount of $85,504,592 for the purpose and deductions of paying costs for the construction of a new Peck Middle School.
Second. Motion has been made and seconded that we approve the bonding request for the purpose of the new Peck Middle School, that $85,504,592. Is there any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, roll call. Councilor Jordan?
Yes.
Councilor Tallman?
Yes.
Councilor Anderson Burgos?
Yes.
Councilor Pueblo?
Yes.
Councilor McGivern? Yes. That is unanimous. That recommendation will go to the full city council next Tuesday. With that in mind,
Motion to adjourn.
motion made and second to adjourn. We're not going to debate it. All those in favor? Any opposed? We stand adjourned.
Good night.